Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I arrived at the Cecil Hotel on a gray afternoon. The air was thick with city noise. The distant honking, the murmur of people walking by, and the occasional clang of the subway underground. I'd read a lot about the place online, stories about its dark history, but I didn't care much. I was tired, stressed, and needed somewhere cheap to stay in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil was it. Old, a little rundown, but cheap and central. The lobby was dim and smelled like a mix of old carpet, cigarette smoke, and something damp. The paint was peeling off the walls in places, and the carpet was stained with years of dirt and foot traffic. A few tired-looking people sat scattered on the threadbare couches. The front desk clerk barely looked up as I handed over my ID and paid for a week. He gave me a small, battered key and told me my room was on the 12th floor. The elevator was old, clunky, and slow. It had those old metal gates that you slide to close instead of the modern doors. When I stepped inside, the fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the buttons were worn so much it was hard to read the numbers. I pressed the 12th floor button and leaned against the wall. The elevator shook a little as it started moving up. When I got to my floor, I pushed the door open and stepped out. The hallway smelled like mildew and stale smoke. The walls were painted a faded yellow, but the paint was chipped in spots, and the ceiling had water stains from leaks. I walked to my room, number 1204. The door was scratched up and had a small peephole near the top. I opened it with the key and stepped inside. The room was small and dark, with a single bed pushed against one wall. The sheets looked clean but thin. A small window faced the street, but the glass was dirty and foggy, making it hard to see outside. There was a small dresser, a cracked mirror, and a tiny bathroom with a broken sink and a shower that barely had water pressure. I dropped my bag on the bed and flopped down, feeling drained. I wasn't expecting luxury, but the room felt more like a cell than a place to relax. Still, it was better than sleeping on the streets or at a friend's crowded apartment. I had been traveling around, looking for work, trying to get my life together after a few bad months. The Cecil was supposed to be a temporary stop. The first few days were mostly quiet. I tried to keep to myself. The other guests on the floor seemed strange. People who looked tired, some clearly down on their luck. I kept my door locked and tried to avoid eye contact in hallways. Sometimes, I'd hear shouting or banging late at night. The walls were thin, and sounds from the other rooms leaked through. One night, after a long day wandering downtown, I was exhausted. I took the elevator down to the lobby to get some water from the vending machine. As I waited for the elevator, I noticed a man standing near the stairs, watching me. He looked rough, his clothes were dirty, and he had a wild look in his eyes. I felt uneasy and quickly stepped into the elevator when it arrived. I pressed a button for my floor and kept my eyes on the doors. The elevator moved slowly, stopping at each floor. At the 10th floor, the doors opened and a woman stepped in. She had dark hair and looked tired. She gave me a quick nod and then stared at the floor. The elevator stopped again, and I was nearly at my floor. Then, suddenly, the elevator jolted and stopped. The lights flickered and went out, leaving us in darkness. The woman gasped softly. I felt my heart race. I pulled out my phone, but the signal was weak. I tried to calm myself, telling the woman that help would come soon. I pressed the emergency button, but there was no answer. We waited in the dark, the silence broken only by our breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered back on and the elevator started moving again. When we reached my floor, I hurried out and back to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The elevator incident made me feel trapped, vulnerable. The next day, I tried to keep busy. I wandered downtown, looking for a job or just a distraction. When I came back in the evening, the hotel was noisier than usual. I heard shouting in the hallways, doors slamming. Some of the guests were arguing, voices raised. I stayed in my room, windows shut tight. A few days later, I noticed strange things happening. Sometimes when I stepped into the elevator alone, it would stop on floors where no one got on or off. The doors would open, but no one was there. The lights flickered more often. It felt like the building was breathing, alive in a way that made me nervous. One night, I took the elevator down to the lobby to get some water again. As the doors closed behind me, I saw a security camera blinking in the corner. I remembered seeing security guard around sometimes, but they seemed uninterested in the guests. The lobby was nearly empty except for the night clerk, who didn't look up from his phone. On the elevator back up, something strange happened. The elevator stopped between floors, the lights went out, and the doors opened just a crack. I could see the dark, empty shaft behind. A sudden cold breeze blew in, and I stepped back feeling my skin crawl. The doors slid shut again, and the elevator started moving up. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the old building, the faulty elevator. But the feeling stayed with me. Something was off. Then, one evening, I was in the elevator alone, going down to meet a friend. I pushed the button for the lobby. The elevator moved smoothly for a while, then stopped suddenly between floors. The lights flickered and went out completely. I was plunged into darkness. I pressed the emergency button, but silence. My phone screen was the only light I had. The elevator creaked and groaned, as if struggling. I took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. After a few minutes, the lights came back on, but the elevator didn't move. The doors opened slightly, but there was no floor, just darkness. Suddenly, the doors slid shut, and the elevator started moving again. I tried to tell myself it was just a mechanical problem, but my heart was pounding. When I got off at the lobby, I hurried out, not looking back. The next morning, I tried to check out of the hotel. At the front desk, the clerk told me my room was still booked through the week. I said I wanted to leave early, but he shrugged, saying no refunds. I felt stuck. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside my door, whispers, footsteps. I didn't dare open the door. I stayed curled up on the bed, listening. A few nights later, something strange happened in the elevator again. Security cameras capture me moving inside the elevator, but I don't remember some of it clearly. The footage showed me pressing buttons, hiding in the corner, peeking out, and moving as if talking to someone, but there was no one else there. I couldn't explain it. Maybe I was confused, tired, or scared. I felt trapped, like something was pressing on my mind, making me act strange. I felt alone in a crowded, noisy city. Days went by. I felt weaker, more anxious. The hotel seemed darker, heavier, like it was closing in on me. I tried to find work, but no luck. My phone battery died often, and I struggled to find places to charge it. Then one day, the water stopped working in my room. I reported it to the front desk, but no one fixed it. I had to go down to the lobby to fill a bottle from the vending machine area. The water tasted odd, like metal and chemicals. I started drinking less, feeling tired and dizzy. The nights got colder, and the heating in the hotel didn't work well. I wrapped myself in the thin blanket from the bed and tried to sleep. On my last night, I decided to go to the roof to get some fresh air. The door was locked, but I found a maintenance door nearby that was sometimes left open. I slipped through and climbed a narrow stairwell up. The roof was cold and windy. I could see the city lights stretching out in every direction. It felt like the first time in weeks I could breathe. The rooftop water tanks stood tall and silent, huge metal cylinders with pipes leading down into the building. I sat down on the concrete edge and looked out. The noise of the city was distant here. The air smelled like rain. I leaned back, feeling tired and alone. The next morning, I was found. They said I drowned in one of the water tanks. The door to the roof had been locked and alarmed, but somehow I was inside. The police said it was an accident, but no one knew how I got in or why. The water was cold and deep. I must have slipped, fallen in, and drowned. The hotel staff said the water tanks were rarely checked, and the roof door was supposed to be secure. Some thought maybe I climbed in through the maintenance access, or that the door had been left open by mistake. No one knew exactly what happened. The strange elevator behavior, the odd noises, the water problems, it all seemed connected, but no one could explain it. Looking back, I realized how trapped I felt in that building, like the walls were closing in and no one was really there to help. The strange things weren't ghosts or monsters. Just an old hotel with broken parts, lonely people, and bad luck. In the end, it was a sad accident in a place that felt cold and unforgiving. No mystery, no magic, just the harsh reality of a building worn down by time and a person caught in its shadows. I still remember the cold that morning we found the Montego. I say we, but it was really just me and a guy from the county named Ron. He worked roads, and I was with search and rescue at the time. Snow had started to melt a little early that spring, and the Forest Service was opening up some of the gates off the mountain roads. The Montego sat right where the snowplow couldn't reach, a pale green 1969 Mercury, sticking out like a sore thumb against the gray slush and tall trees. Empty, locked, and quiet. I could tell right away it didn't belong there. The men had gone missing in February. 5 of them, all from Yuba City, all with what they called mild intellectual disabilities. Not what folks used to say back in the day, words we've all learned not to use, but they had trouble with things. Keeping jobs, figuring out plans, remembering stuff. But they weren't helpless. They all lived with their families, worked at places like the Vocational Rehab Center, played basketball together. Good guys. They had gone to see a college game in Chico, and that was the last anyone saw them. The car was 70 miles east of Chico, way off their out home, deep into Plumas National Forest, up an unpaved road that even locals didn't use in winter. When we first saw it, we figured they might have gotten lost in a storm, panicked, maybe tried to walk out. Happens more than you'd think. But when we popped the trunk and found neatly folded maps, candy wrappers, and some fast food bags, I got that tight feeling in my stomach that something wasn't right. The keys weren't in the ignition. The car was unlocked. No damage to it. It had gas, too. Later, mechanics said it would have started right up. So why walk away from it? We searched for weeks. Dogs, choppers, volunteers. The snow didn't help. That whole area is rough country. Thick woods, steep canyons, and barely any cell service even now. After a month, most of us knew we wouldn't find them alive. That's the thing you don't say out loud, but you feel it in your bones. Then in June, a group of motorcyclists took a wrong turn on a trail and found the first body. It was about 20 miles from where the car had been, up a service road, tucked into the forest like something hidden on purpose. He was lying on his back, shoes gone, covered in bits of snow and pine needles. His body was already partly decomposed. The wildlife had gotten to him. We found the other 3 about a quarter mile farther. 2 had died together under a tree, curled up like they were trying to stay warm. The third was maybe 50 feet away, face down in the brush. One of them had a flashlight still clutched in his hand. I don't think they ever found batteries in it. Maybe they thought it would work when it got dark. The 4th man, Ted, was different. We didn't find him in the woods. We found him in a trailer, in a summer cabin closed up for the season. The cabin belonged to the Forest Service, just a basic thing, single story, with bunk beds and a stock pantry. There was plenty of food inside, canned beans, dehydrated meals, even milk powder. There was wood for the stove, extra blankets, but he never touched any of it. He had taken off his shoes and tucked himself in a bed like he was trying to sleep off a fever. The coroner said he died of starvation. He had lost almost half his body weight. They figured he lived 2 to 3 months after the others. And in all that time, he never lit a fire, never opened a single can. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of violence. But the details bothered me. The trailer was locked from the inside. A window had been broken, and that's how we think he got in, but he didn't even try to seal it up. There were matches on the counter, blankets on the shelves. He just never used them. Then there was the 5th man, Gary. He was never found. Not a single trace. No clothing, no bones, no signs he'd been in the cabin or with the others when they died. And that raised more questions than it answered, because Gary was the highest functioning of the group. He could drive, use a bank account, follow a map. Some people thought maybe he snapped and left them. Some thought he led them up there. His own family never believed that. They said he hated the cold, hated camping, and was afraid of the dark. I remember the drive up to the cabin the day we found Ted. The road was barely passable even in summer. Branches scratched the side of the truck, and at one point we had to get out and move a fallen log. The air was still and heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. When we walked into the cabin, it smelled of old wood and something sour. Ted's body was in the back room, curled under the covers. His feet were drawn up like he'd been cold for a long time. The mattress was soaked through, and the blanket was pulled up to his chin. The oddest thing? The light bulb in the cabin worked. Someone had flipped it on and off. The generator outside had fuel in it, but it was never started. We kept coming back to that question. Why go up that road? There were no signs they had been chased. No signs they tried to call for help. In fact, one of the men had a working watch, and another had a pack of neatly folded clothes like they were planning to change. But then they just wandered off into the woods. For a long time, I figured we'd never know. People talked about cults, about hitchhikers, even about mountain men who didn't want strangers around. But it wasn't until years later, when I was long out of the field, that I learned something that made it all click for me. I ran into a guy at a veterans meeting in Grass Valley. He was older, grizzled, walked with a limp. We got to talking over coffee, and I mentioned the case like I always did when I met folks from that part of the state. His eyes narrowed, and he said he remembered that winter. He'd been living in a cabin not too far from there. Said he'd seen something strange around the time those men vanished. He didn't want to go on record, but he said he'd been walking a logging trail when he saw a group of 5 men walking single file down the middle of the track. One of them, the one in the lead, was talking loud, almost yelling. He couldn't make out the words, but the man had something in his hand. Maybe a map, maybe just paper. He said the others followed close behind, heads down, looking nervous. He didn't approach them, didn't wave. He just watched. Said something about the scene gave him a bad feeling. Later, when the snow came in, he tried to hike out and ended up snowed in for weeks. When he finally got to a radio, he heard about the missing men. He was sure the man leading them was Gary. Now, this could have been a mistake. It was years ago, and people misremember things. But it lined up with what we thought. They weren't chased. They weren't lost. Not at first. Someone led them up there. I started piecing things together. The car was found parked carefully, not crashed. The maps were folded. They weren't in a panic when they stopped. Someone thought they had a reason to be there. Then I remembered something else. About a year before this all happened, Gary had told a coworker about a plan to take his friends up into the mountains. Said he wanted to start fresh, maybe live off the land. The guy he told thought it was a joke, but maybe Gary didn't. Maybe he got it in his head that he could take care of them, that they could be free up there. No more people looking at them weird, no more rules or rehab, just the woods. But they weren't prepared. They had fast food and light jackets. When the weather turned, they panicked. Maybe one or two tried to walk out and died from exposure. The others followed. Gary might have gone for help, or maybe he ran, ashamed or scared. Or maybe he died out there, in some ravine we never thought to look. Ted, the last one, found shelter, but by then he must have been too far gone. Confused, starving, maybe sick. He lay down to rest and never got back up. I think about it every winter when the snow piles up and the back roads disappear. How easy it is to vanish out there. People think it takes something dark, murder, ghosts, monsters. But the truth is quieter. Just one bad decision, one wrong turn, one person with a plan that didn't make sense to anyone else. And 5 lives gone just like that. We never found Gary. But sometimes when I'm driving the forest roads alone, I catch myself looking out into the trees, wondering if he's still out there, buried under moss and leaves. Or maybe he made it out and never looked back. Maybe he's just a name now, a missing person on an old flyer. But I don't think so. I think the mountains kept him, same as they kept the others. Not out of cruelty, just indifference. The forest doesn't care who you are or why you came. It's just there, cold, quiet, and waiting. I remember the first time I heard about that terrible tragedy in the Ural Mountains. 9 experienced hikers, strong, smart, well-prepared people, found dead under the most baffling and disturbing circumstances. The story stuck with me because it was real. No ghosts, no monsters. Just something out there, something so fierce and strange it took them all. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, hiking in rough places, camping in wild country. So the idea that a group like that could die so badly, so mysteriously, in a place many of us would call home in the wild, hit me hard. I wanted to understand what happened, so I dug into the details. What I found chilled me. There were 9 hikers, all experienced. Some of them had done hundreds, maybe thousands of kilometers of hiking before, through tough terrain and bad weather. They had all the right gear, warm clothes, tents, food, navigation tools. They weren't amateurs. This wasn't their first cold night in the mountains. Their route was planned through the northern Urals, a rugged, remote region with harsh winters. It's a place where the weather can turn on you in minutes. The hikers set off in January, when the cold was biting deep, the wind sharp and unrelenting. The Ural Mountains are no joke in winter. Temperatures easily drop below minus 30 degrees Celsius, and storms can rage with little warning. Still, these 9 were confident. They had prepared. They had experience. After they failed to check in on time, search teams were sent out. What they found was horrifying. Their tent was ripped open from the inside. It looked like something desperate had torn through it, claws or fists maybe, but nothing in the area showed signs of large animals nearby. The tent poles were bent, fabric shredded, and inside were the bodies of the hikers. Some of them were missing eyes, others tongues. Many had crushed ribs, as if something had crushed or slammed into them with incredible force. They were nearly naked, despite the freezing temperatures. Their clothes were scattered nearby, half frozen in the snow. None of it made sense. The official Soviet investigation concluded the cause was some compelling natural force, but no one ever explained how or why that force would do what it did. The hikers were too experienced to panic like that and rip their clothes off in freezing weather. Their injuries were too brutal and strange for normal animal attacks or avalanches. It didn't sit right with me. I started to picture the moments before they died. What could make 9 strong people tear apart their own tent, strip off their clothes in the cold, and suffer such strange injuries? Something that wasn't just the cold, or a bear, or a landslide. Something no one could name. I kept thinking about the weather that night. I read old reports and survivor stories from similar areas. When temperatures drop fast and the wind blows at crazy speeds, the cold can confuse your mind and body. Hypothermia is a silent killer. It makes your brain shut down logic, makes you take off your clothes, think you're too hot when you're freezing. But it doesn't explain the crushed ribs or missing eyes and tongues. Not by itself. The area they camped in was a high clearing, exposed to the wind. I imagined a storm coming in fast. Maybe the wind howled like a wild animal, pushing against the tent walls, shaking everything. If the storm was bad enough, maybe the hikers were trying to escape something inside the tent. Maybe they panicked, ripped the tent open from the inside, trying to get out into the blizzard. But even then, how would their bodies end up like that? Crushed ribs could come from falling or being hit by debris, but nothing else around suggested a rock slide or tree fall. And the missing eyes and tongues? That's something else entirely. I remembered reading that scavengers like birds or small animals sometimes come after people die, especially if the bodies are exposed. In the cold, some tissue can freeze and be ripped away. But in these cases, the wounds looked too clean and strange for scavengers. It was almost like their faces had been attacked while they were alive, but no animal could have done it with such precision. Their clothing was scattered, but some was found in strange places, some buried in snow, some wrapped around branches. The cold made movement harder, but somehow they moved around a lot. That suggested panic, maybe confusion. I thought about what I've seen during bad storms on the trail. When the wind and cold reach a certain point, they become almost unbearable. Your body feels numb, your mind clouds over. I've had friends suffer bad hypothermia, and in their last moments before going unconscious, they do crazy things. Rip off gloves, take off layers, try to move when they should stay still. I've never seen anything close to what happened to those hikers, though. Then I considered the possibility of some kind of weather phenomenon beyond just cold and wind. Something like a microburst or intense wind vortex that can slam through a small area with unbelievable force, ripping tents, breaking ribs, tossing people around like rag dolls. If a sudden gust like that hit the campsite, it could explain the crushed ribs and torn tent. If the storm forced them to abandon the tent, they could have stripped off wet clothes to avoid freezing to death while wet, which sometimes happens in panic. But that still doesn't explain everything. The missing tongues and eyes? It remains the darkest part of the mystery. What if they suffered from severe frostbite that caused tissue to die and be lost before discovery? But the bodies were found soon enough that advanced frostbite wouldn't explain missing parts so precisely. Another idea I thought about was the effect of rapid decompression or intense pressure changes. The mountains sometimes trap strange atmospheric conditions. A sudden drop in pressure could cause internal injuries, but no one has ever recorded such a thing killing hikers like that. As I tried to piece this puzzle together, I began to understand the real horror wasn't just the cold or the storm. It was how fragile humans are in the face of nature's raw power. These hikers prepared for a cold trip, but nature has its own rules. Rules that can overwhelm even the strongest, most experienced people. They were caught by a storm unlike anything they expected. The wind tore through their tent, crushing them against the poles and fabric. In a desperate attempt to survive, their minds turned against them. Confused, numb, disoriented, they stripped off clothes, trying to shed wet layers, but the cold was too much. Some injuries came from falling debris or from being slammed into the hard ground or nearby rocks by the storm's power. The eyes and tongues? Maybe those injuries were caused by the violent shaking, perhaps even by the frostbite damaging soft tissue rapidly, and then being broken off during the storm or after death by the movement of the bodies. Scavengers might have taken some tissue too, but the cold kept most animals away for a time. The worst part is how helpless they were, how little control humans have when nature turns deadly fast. It wasn't ghosts, monsters, or any fairy tale horror. It was the mountain, the cold, the storm, the pressure crushing their bodies and minds. When I think about it now, the real story isn't about some strange force. It's about how brutal and indifferent the wild can be. No warnings, no mercy. 9 hikers, strong, smart, prepared, brought down by a combination of weather, cold, and maybe a violent wind no one could predict. It's a grim reminder for anyone who ventures out there. Respect the mountains, respect the weather, and know that sometimes even your best preparation isn't enough. The wild doesn't care who you are. It just is. And sometimes that's all it takes to break you. Years later, I stood at the edge of a similar mountain clearing, feeling the wind whipping my face, snow crunching under my boots. I could almost hear the echoes of that terrible night in the Ural Mountains. I thought about those 9 hikers, and I realized this. There's a raw power out here, cold and silent, that no human can fight. The truth of what happened to them isn't some dark secret. It's the truth of the wild itself. A reminder that nature is not safe, not kind, and it's always ready to remind us of our place. I was hitchhiking on a quiet road just outside a small town. It was late afternoon, the kind of golden light that stretches shadows long across the cracked pavement and warms the air just enough before the cool of night settles in. I had been trying to get home for hours. The cars that passed were few and none stopped. I was tired, hungry, and maybe a little careless. I wasn't thinking about the danger. I just wanted a ride. When the car finally pulled over, it was an older model, beat-up sedan with faded paint and a quiet engine. 2 people were inside, a man and a woman. They seemed normal enough. Nothing about them made me uneasy at first. They smiled and said they'd take me where I needed to go. I felt a rush of relief and climbed in. The ride started out calm. They made small talk, but I mostly stayed quiet, staring out the window. The scenery passed by in a blur. Fields, a few houses, trees lining the road. But then the mood shifted. The driver slowed down on a stretch of road that felt too isolated. The woman next to me reached over and locked the doors. Something in me tightened, an instinct I couldn't ignore. Before I could react, the man grabbed me roughly. I struggled, but they were stronger than me. The car stopped on a dirt road, hidden by thick bushes and trees. They forced me out, pushed me into a small cabin-like house that felt cold and stale. The light was dim inside, and the air smelled of damp wood and old dust. They didn't speak much after that. The woman showed me a small, narrow wooden box under the bed, a coffin-like space just big enough for me to curl up in. It was dark, cramped, and terrifying. They told me to stay inside it when I wasn't needed. At first, I screamed and begged, but after hours of silence and darkness, the panic turned into numbness. Days became weeks. Weeks turned into months. I lost track of time. The only moments I got out of that box were when they needed me to cook their meals, clean the house, or worse. They were cruel, cold, and merciless. I learned not to cry, not to show fear. It only made things worse. The box was my world for 7 years. 7 years trapped beneath their bed, swallowed by darkness. My body aching from being cramped so long. My mind drifted through fog and shadow. The world outside seemed like a distant dream I could barely remember. Sometimes when I was forced out, I saw the sun and felt the wind on my face. Those moments were a sharp contrast to the prison I lived in. I kept my head down, did what I was told, and avoided angering them. They drilled fear deep into me, and I believed escape was impossible. For a long time, I didn't even try. My spirit was broken, my will crushed by years of control and abuse. I believed I was worthless, invisible, but deep inside, a small part of me refused to die. One day, something shifted. They left the front door unlocked for the first time in years. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open, stepped outside, and breathed in the fresh air like it was a gift. I ran. The world was overwhelming, loud, bright, and fast. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I had to get help. Eventually, I found a neighbor who called the police. The investigation was long and painful. I had to relive every nightmare, every horror, but I stood firm. I testified against the couple who had stolen my life. Their conviction brought a small sense of justice, a closing of a dark chapter. Now I'm free. The scars remain, but so does my strength. I'm learning to live again, to trust again, to find hope. Every day is a battle, but I'm winning. My story is not just about survival, it's about reclaiming my life one step at a time. The night was quiet when I first heard the sirens. It was one of those late spring evenings in Keddie, California, the kind where the air is still cool, but the trees start to hum softly in the wind. I lived just down the road from Cabin 28, the small rental tucked into the woods that had always been a place for families to escape the noise of the world. That night, though, everything was shattered. I remember waking up to the distant flashing of red and blue lights through my bedroom window. It felt strange, like something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. There was a stillness outside, an eerie calm that didn't belong. The police cars and ambulances weren't something we usually saw here. Keddie was a quiet town, peaceful. It wasn't supposed to be the kind of place where something terrible could happen. I got out of bed, pulled on my shoes, and walked toward the road. A few neighbors were already gathering, whispering in low voices, faces pale in the moonlight. No one spoke directly about what had happened. Just bits of news passed around like a cold wind. Cabin 28 had been the scene of a brutal crime. A mother, her son, and the son's friend had been found dead. Their bodies left in a way that made you want to look away, but couldn't. The younger daughter and her friend, both asleep in another room, were somehow untouched. One child was missing. No one knew where. The police kept the scene guarded, the yellow tape glowing under the streetlights, but the story spread fast. I heard that the crime scene was so violent that even seasoned officers were shaken. Blood splattered on the walls, furniture overturned, signs of a struggle everywhere. It was as if someone had been desperate, angry, but also cold and methodical. The mother had tried to protect her children, but it wasn't enough. The house itself felt like it had been ripped apart by the chaos. Broken glass littered the floor, doors torn off their hinges, furniture smashed. The air smelled stale and metallic, a heavy weight that settled in your stomach. You could almost imagine the sounds that had filled that cabin hours before. Screams, crying, the desperate shouts of someone fighting for their life. I try to understand how something like this could happen in a place like Keddie. People knew each other here, or at least they thought they did. Who could do such a thing, and why? Days passed, and the investigation unfolded. Detectives came and went, combing through the wreckage for clues. The younger daughter and her friend who had been in the other room were questioned repeatedly, but they remembered little, just the sounds of shouting, the feeling of cold, and then silence. The missing child was a mystery, vanished without a trace. Years slipped by. The house was boarded up. Rumors grew wild. Some said the killer was someone close to the family. Others whispered about outsiders who'd slipped into town for a moment of madness. Several suspects came forward, some with shaky alibis, others with reasons no one could quite explain. But no arrests were made. No one was convicted. The case went cold, a stain on a quiet town. I often thought about that missing child, the one who had disappeared into the shadows that night. Years later, I heard the news that the child had been found. Not alive, but a body buried far from the cabin. The discovery answered some questions, but left a deeper sadness behind. The family had been torn apart in the worst way imaginable. It was a grim reminder that evil doesn't always get caught. Sometimes it hides, waits, or walks free among us. The wounds left behind don't heal easily. I think about the mother, who must have fought so hard for her children. I wonder about the younger daughter and her friend, living with the trauma, trying to make sense of the nightmare they survived. In the end, the only thing clear was that the violence of that night changed everything. Cabin 28 became a place people avoided, a silent warning that darkness can creep into even the most peaceful corners. No ghosts haunted that house, just the memory of a terrible crime, a family destroyed, and the bitter truth that sometimes justice doesn't come easy, or at all. Brandon was driving home late at night on a narrow, country road I'd never been on before. I was with him, sitting in the passenger seat, but that's where the story starts to get weird, because after that night, no one ever saw Brandon again. We had been out visiting some family, and he was eager to get back. The sky was dark, except for a few stars poking through the clouds, and the road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by thick trees and patches of tall grass. There were no streetlights, just the dull yellow glow of Brandon's headlights cutting through the darkness. The radio was off because he said it distracted him, but there was only the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional rustle from the trees outside. At first, the drive was uneventful. Brandon was focused, driving cautiously around bends and through dips. The road was old, cracked in places, with faded white lines that barely showed in the dark. After about an hour, Brandon glanced over at me and said, "I think I missed the turn. This isn't the way I usually go." I looked out, but all I could see was more dark forest. There were no signs, no buildings, nothing but blackness and the narrow strip of asphalt beneath us. We didn't have GPS, and our phones had weak signals. Brandon frowned, tried to get a signal, but the screen showed no bars. "Looks like we're stuck out here," he muttered, tapping his phone. I suggested we stop for a moment, maybe check the map in the glove compartment. Brandon pulled the car off the road and slowed down onto a dirt shoulder. But suddenly, the car hit a patch of loose gravel, and before he could react, the car skidded off the road and landed in a shallow ditch. The tires spun uselessly in the soft mud, and the car tilted awkwardly to the side. Brandon cursed under his breath and tried turning the wheel, but the car wouldn't budge. We were stuck. I told him to stay calm, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. The forest around us was dense and quiet, the silence almost loud in the absence of traffic or city sounds. We both stepped out of the car. The air was cool and smelled like damp earth and pine. Brandon pulled his phone out again, hoping for signal. This time, it showed one bar. He dialed his parents, explaining the situation. He told them we were on a rural road near a small town, but he wasn't exactly sure where. As he talked, he scanned the horizon and said he could see some faint lights in the distance. He thought they might be from a town, or maybe a farm. We agreed he'd walk toward the lights to find help, while I stayed with the car, making sure it wouldn't roll further into the ditch. Brandon put on a jacket and grabbed a flashlight from the glove box. The beam cut a narrow path ahead as he started walking down the uneven shoulder of the road, heading toward the glow of the lights. I stayed behind, my heart pounding as I watched his figure disappear into the darkness. The silence around me felt heavier now, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Brandon was still on the phone with his parents as he walked. His voice was steady, describing the trees thinning out and the road curving. The lights got brighter, he said, maybe only a few hundred yards away. Then suddenly he shouted something. Oh, S \\\\\\\\\. I heard his voice crack with fear. The line went dead. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. I called his parents and told them what happened, but there was nothing we could do until morning. We spent the night at the roadside, me sitting with the car, trying to stay awake, staring out into the dark where Brandon had gone. The next day, search parties came. The police combed the road, the woods, and the nearby fields. They brought dogs, helicopters, and volunteers, but no trace of Brandon was ever found. No footprints, no dropped items, no sign of a struggle or a fight. The ditch where the car was stuck was shallow and open, with no bushes or tall grass that could hide a person. The lights Brandon saw were eventually traced back to a farmhouse several miles down the road. When they checked there, no one had seen anyone walking nearby that night. It was as if Brandon had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation was thorough. They looked at his phone records, his bank accounts, and any possible reasons he might have disappeared voluntarily. There was no indication of foul play, no debts, no enemies. Brandon was a quiet guy, reliable, with no history of running away or hiding. The locals whispered about strange things in the woods, but nothing concrete. No animals attacked. No dangerous criminals were in the area. The truth was, the place was just a forgotten stretch of road with sparse traffic and lots of wilderness. Months passed. The search was called off. Brandon was officially declared missing, presumed dead, but with no body, no explanation. I still remember standing at that ditch, the cold creeping in, watching the headlights of the search trucks fade into the distance. What haunted me most is how normal it all seemed until that one moment on the phone, right before he screamed. The most logical explanation, the one that the police quietly leaned toward but never said out loud, was that Brandon got disoriented in the dark. The woods nearby are thick, with uneven ground, hidden holes, and fast-moving streams. If he slipped or fell, he could have been injured or trapped somewhere hard to find. Without a flashlight or clear landmarks, he might have wandered off the road entirely, and the cold night would have made it impossible to stay alive for long. That night, I learned how quickly a familiar world can turn into a place where people simply disappear without a trace. No mystery, no monsters, just the quiet, relentless power of nature and the thin line between safety and the unknown. Brandon never returned, and that road, the one where his car slipped into the ditch, remains a place where no one goes alone after dark. The farm was nestled far away from the nearest village, deep in the Bavarian countryside. It was the kind of place where the quiet settled so thick you could hear your own heartbeat echoing off the old wooden walls. The family who lived there, 6 of them, had lived simply, tending their animals and working the land. They kept to themselves, mostly the kind of people who knew every inch of their property and rarely needed anything from the outside world. The father, a man used to the silence and slow pace of farm life, had been on edge for days before the tragedy. It started with small things, a noise in the attic late at night, soft footsteps that didn't belong to anyone in the house. When he went up to check, he found nothing but empty rafters and shadows. A few days later, he found footprints in the snow outside, unfamiliar and strange. They led around the house, circling close but never approaching the front door. The prints looked like boots, heavy and worn, but the man knew he hadn't seen any visitors, nor had the neighbors mentioned anyone passing through. He told no one much about it, maybe because he didn't want to seem paranoid. But something about those footprints and the sounds gnawed at him. The family was tight-knit, 6 people who depended on each other, 2 parents, their 3 children, and a grandmother. They lived off the land, fed their animals daily and kept a warm fire burning through the cold nights. One morning, a neighbor who had come by to check in noticed something wrong. The smoke from the chimney hadn't moved for days, and no one answered when he called out. The gate was slightly ajar, swinging on rusty hinges, and the farmyard was silent in a way that made the neighbor's skin crawl. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was cold, the air stale and thick with the smell of something old and wrong. The animals, chickens, a cow, a few goats, were all fed, water troughs filled, and hay stacked neatly. The fireplace had fresh logs on it, a fire ready to be lit, but no sign of life. It was like the family had vanished, but someone still took care of the place. Then, in the kitchen, the neighbor found the first body. The father, lying still and pale on the cold stone floor. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. The others were found in different rooms. The mother in the bedroom, the children in the living room and another bedroom, and the grandmother in the sitting area. Each was dead, and the signs were brutal, deep wounds, blood pooled beneath them, clear evidence of a violent attack. But what shocked the investigators was not just the crime itself, but the fact that the animals had been fed in the days since the murders, and the firewood was always stacked and ready. Someone was living there after the killings, staying in the house without anyone seeing or hearing. The police scoured the farm, looking for clues. They found footprints inside the attic, the same kind that had been seen outside in the snow. They traced them to a small, hidden crawl space above the ceiling, where someone could have lived without being noticed. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints leading away. Whoever had done this had stayed. Neighbors reported hearing nothing. No calls for help, no screams, only the usual quiet. The farm was isolated, surrounded by thick forest and snow, which made it even stranger that no one had seen or heard anything. Days turned into weeks, and the case grew colder. The police had no suspects, no motive, and no sign of the killer. The family had no known enemies, and there was nothing stolen or taken from the house. It was as if the killer had chosen this remote place to hide in plain sight, feeding animals and stoking fires while the world around them remained oblivious. The theory most agreed on was chilling. The murderer had lived inside the house with the family before or during the attack, hiding in the attic or crawl spaces. They had waited for the right moment, struck swiftly, and then stayed on, blending into the routine as if nothing had happened. No one ever found out why or who. The case remains unsolved to this day. From what I know, when I first heard the story years later, I couldn't shake the feeling of how real and terrifying it was. Imagine someone so close, so hidden, living in the same walls you call home, watching and waiting. The farm wasn't just a place of death. It was a prison, a trap, a nightmare made flesh in the quiet countryside. The most haunting part is not the violence, but the silence that followed. The animals kept fed, the firewood stacked, the life of the farm kept moving forward by an invisible hand. Whoever did, it wasn't just a killer. There was someone who wanted to erase the family, but keep their world intact, pretending everything was normal while the worst thing possible had already happened. The farm stands empty now, left to rot and be swallowed by the woods. The neighbors don't go near it. The footprints in the snow have long since faded, but the story lingers, a reminder that sometimes the worst monsters aren't things you can see. They're the ones hiding right where you live, waiting for you to notice. I grew up hearing about June and Jennifer Gibbons, the twins who lived in a quiet corner of Wales but seemed to carry a storm inside them. I never met them, but their story followed me for years. It wasn't the kind of story that had ghosts or magic. It was something far darker, rooted in real life. A story about two girls so tightly bound to each other that they created a world no one else could enter. Their lives were strange, full of silence and secrets, and the end of their story was as haunting as anything you might imagine, but with no ghosts involved. June and Jennifer were identical twins, born at the same time, looking exactly alike down to the smallest detail. But what set them apart from everyone else wasn't just their looks. It was the strange way they refused to speak to anyone outside their pair. Their world was closed off. They spoke only to each other, using a language no one else understood. The silence they held towards the rest of the world was deafening. They didn't just ignore people, they shut them out completely. In school, teachers tried everything. They would call on June or Jennifer, but only silence or whispered words came back. When asked to speak to others, they stayed silent or mumbled to each other in that secret language. Classmates felt uncomfortable, and the twins became more and more isolated. Some people thought they were shy, others thought they were rude or strange. But the truth was much more complicated. June and Jennifer weren't just shy. They had created a private universe, a shared world of stories and ideas, where only they could live. Inside their secret world, the twins wrote stories. But these were no ordinary stories. They were dark, twisted, and disturbing. They made journals filled with strange tales about violence, betrayal, and pain, things no child should be writing about. They used their writing like a mirror for their own feelings, a way to understand the silence they had wrapped themselves in. Their notebooks were hidden away, never meant for anyone else to see. The stories were like pieces of a puzzle, each revealing a bit more of their inner world. But no one outside ever really understood what was happening. As the years went by, their silence didn't break. In fact, it grew thicker. Their parents became desperate. Doctors and therapists came and went, trying to find a way to reach the girls. But June and Jennifer clung to each other like nothing else mattered. They never spoke to anyone else, and slowly, the outside world gave up trying to break through. The twins were both trapped and safe inside their shared silence. But as they grew older, something dark began to take shape between them. There was a strange pact they made, one that tied their lives together in a way no one could understand. They promised that one of them would have to die for the other to live a normal life. It wasn't just a fantasy. It was a real, heavy promise made out of desperation and pain. They felt so trapped by each other that the only way forward was for one to disappear. Jennifer was the one who died. The circumstances around her death were unclear and mysterious. She was sent to a psychiatric hospital in London, Broadmoor, which was known for holding people who were deeply troubled or dangerous. There, Jennifer's health began to fail, and in 1993, she died. The official cause was said to be acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart, but many believed it was more complicated. Some thought the death was connected to the strange life the twins had lived. Others whispered about neglect or something darker. The truth remains murky, and no one ever fully explained what happened inside those hospital walls. June survived. She left behind the silence, the secret language, and the strange bond with her sister. She slowly learned to live in the world again, and in the years after Jennifer's death, June started to live what could be called a normal life. She spoke more, made new friends, and even built a career. But the shadow of her sister's death stayed with her, a quiet reminder of a life they once shared and the terrible price it cost. The story of June and Jennifer is often told as a tragic mystery, but it's also a very human one. It shows how pain and isolation can twist the lives of even the closest people, and how sometimes silence speaks louder than words. It's not a story of ghosts or magic, but of two real girls who live in a world too dark for most to understand. When I first heard about the twins, I was just a kid curious about strange stories, but as I dug deeper, I found something far more unsettling than I expected. I learned how June and Jennifer's childhood was full of loneliness. They didn't have friends, and their parents struggled to connect with them. The twins spoke only to each other, in whispers that no one else could follow. They built a strange bubble where nothing from the outside world mattered. Their school years were especially tough. Teachers tried to reach them, but the twins responded with silence. They refused to participate in class discussions or joining games. Other kids avoided them, not out of cruelty, but confusion and fear. June and Jennifer seemed to live in a different reality, one that others couldn't enter. Even their parents, though they loved them, didn't know how to reach through that silence. In the rare moments when they did speak, it was always to each other. They developed a language that was almost impossible to understand, made up of words, sounds, and gestures that only they knew. It was like they were creating their own secret code, a way to keep the world out. Their isolation was total. Their notebooks revealed something chilling. Inside those pages were stories filled with dark themes, stories of pain, fear, and violence. The twins used these writings to express what they couldn't say out loud. Some of their tales were terrifying, full of characters trapped in situations as hopeless as their own. The stories weren't just fiction, they were windows into the twins' minds, reflecting the struggle inside. As they got older, June and Jennifer's bond became something that scared people. They were so dependent on each other that they seemed unable to live apart. Yet that closeness became a prison. The idea of one dying for the other wasn't a childish fantasy. It was a desperate plan. They both believed that if one of them could disappear, the other could be free to live a normal life. The idea was terrifying, but also strangely logical to them. They were stuck in a place of silence and secrecy, unable to break free, and the only way forward was through sacrifice. Jennifer's death, years later, was the tragic result of this pact. The hospital where she was sent was a dark place for anyone, especially someone as fragile as Jennifer. The official story was medical, but no one really knew what went on in those lonely hospital halls. After Jennifer died, June's life changed. She began to find her voice. Slowly, she stepped back into the world, learning to live without the silence that had ruled her life. It wasn't easy. The memories and the bond she had lost stayed with her, but she managed to build a new life, one where she could speak to others, make connections, and find some peace. Her survival wasn't just about escaping her sister's shadow. It was about hope. June's story shows that even after deep darkness, there can be light. Life doesn't have to end in silence or despair. There's a way forward, even when it feels impossible. Their story remains a reminder of how complex the human mind is, how isolation can grow into something dangerous, and how sometimes the most frightening things aren't supernatural, but real and close to home. June and Jennifer's lives were full of pain, but June's survival proves that healing is possible. Their story is tragic, but it is also a story of hope and the power to change. I think about their story often because it feels real to ignore. Two people so close they became one, and one had to disappear for the other to survive. No magic, no ghosts, just the dark weight of loneliness and the desperate hope for freedom. June lives on. She found her way out, and that's the part one want to remember. The part that says no matter how deep the silence, no matter how dark the world seems, there's always a chance to find light again. The house was perfect. That's what we kept telling ourselves over and over. After years of saving and searching, we finally found a home in Westfield, New Jersey. The quiet neighborhood, the tree-lined streets, the old colonial-style house with its big porch and wide windows. It was exactly what we wanted for our family. My wife, Sarah, and I had talked about moving out of the city for a long time to give our two kids, Emma and Jake, a better life. A safer life. When we saw the house, we knew this was it. It had character, something you don't often find in newer homes, and the price was reasonable. We put in an offer, and it was accepted quickly. The home inspection went well, and everything seemed normal. We were excited, already imagining the kids playing in the backyard, the holidays we would spend around the fireplace, the summer barbecues on the porch. We packed up our apartment in the city and planned the move. The closing was set for the first week of July. We couldn't wait to start this new chapter. Then, a week before the move-in date, the first letter arrived. At first, it was easy to dismiss. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a font that looked like it came from an old typewriter. It was strange because the letters seemed to know things about us. The kids' names, the fact that Emma loved to draw, and Jake had just started soccer practice. It mentioned details that no one outside our family could possibly know. The letter was short but chilling. It said that the house had been watched for decades and that the writer was the one who had been keeping an eye on it the whole time. It made strange comments about the children's safety, how the family must be careful, and that the house had secrets. We showed the letter to our real estate agent and the police, but no one took it seriously. The agent suggested it might be a prank from a neighbor, and the police said there was nothing to investigate without a threat or crime. Still, the letter unsettled us. My wife and I talked late into the night about whether we should still move in. We decided to ignore it and focus on the excitement of a new home. But then the letters kept coming. Every few days, another envelope would arrive with a typed letter inside. Each one got more detailed and more disturbing. The writer talked about the house like it was their property, even though we owned it now. They referenced things that only someone physically watching the house could know. The time we were out shopping, when the kids were in the backyard playing, and even what we had for dinner some nights. The letters sometimes warned us to be careful, especially about the kids. One letter mentioned that Emma's drawings held secrets, as if the writer had seen them. Another letter said Jake's soccer practice was not as safe as it seems. I couldn't explain how the writer knew these things. Our home was supposed to be private, but the idea that someone was watching us, watching the house, was terrifying. We tried installing security cameras and motion sensors around the property, but they never caught anyone. The police came around a few times to check, but they couldn't find any signs of trespassing or break-ins. Our neighbors said they hadn't seen anything unusual either. It felt like the watcher was always just out of sight, always watching from a distance, maybe from a nearby house or the trees. The letters didn't stop. They even mentioned times when we thought the kids were safe, saying things like, "You think they're alone, but they're never alone, and not everyone who comes here has good intentions." My wife started having nightmares, and Emma was scared to be in her room alone. Jake became quiet and didn't want to go outside. We began to realize the letters weren't just some prank or harmless joke. Someone was fixated on our family in this house. The thought made me angry and afraid. I wanted to protect my family, but I didn't know how. The police were no help beyond taking the letters and promising to keep an eye out. The neighborhood itself seemed normal enough during the day. People waved when we walked by, kids played on the sidewalks, and the local stores had friendly faces. But at night, everything felt off. Every shadow looked like someone watching. Every rustle in the trees made me jump. One night, we heard noises outside, footsteps on the porch, scratching at a window. I grabbed a flashlight and went out, but there was no one there. Just the empty yard and the rustling trees. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the windows, waiting for something to happen. We stopped talking about moving in. The dream home had turned into a nightmare. We felt trapped in a limbo, owning a house we were too afraid to live in. The letters kept arriving for months, each one more detailed, more personal. The writer clearly knew our schedule, where the kids went to school, and even the kind of toothpaste we used. The letters spoke of watching from the shadows, keeping the house safe, but never explained why or who they were. It was like living with an invisible stalker who wanted us to be afraid, but never actually did anything, or maybe was just waiting. We finally made the hardest decision. We couldn't stay. The stress was too much, the fear too real. We sold the house back to the bank at a loss, packed up our things, and moved back to the city, where at least we felt safe. The house still sits there in Westfield, empty and quiet, waiting for the next family. The letters stopped coming to us after we left, but the story made headlines. People speculated about the watcher. Was it a neighbor with a strange obsession, a former owner who never left, or someone else entirely? The police never caught the writer, and the case remains open. Our dream home became a nightmare we couldn't wake from. We lost a lot: money, peace of mind, and the chance for a better life. But in the end, we realized some things are more important than a house. Our safety, our family. We had to walk away from something we loved to protect what mattered most. That house is still out there, watched by someone we never saw, and maybe never will. And I hope whoever buys it next is ready for what comes with it. Because sometimes the scariest things don't come from ghosts or stories. They come from real people, real dangers, and the quiet fear that you're never truly alone. I booked the Airbnb on a whim. It was a small cabin tucked deep in the woods, the kind of place that looked perfect for a quiet weekend away from the city noise. The pictures showed a cozy space, rough wooden beams, a stone fireplace, simple but warm furniture. It wasn't far from the nearest town, but still private enough to feel isolated. I thought it would be a good spot to write, relax, and disconnect for a couple days. When I arrived, the sun was just setting, painting the sky with soft pinks and oranges. The gravel driveway was long and narrow, flanked by tall pine trees that swayed gently in the wind. I parked the car near the cabin and grabbed my bags. The only sound around me was the crunch of the gravel under my boots and the distant call of a bird settling in for the night. The cabin was just as the photos promised, simple but comfortable. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and something like pine resin. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with an odd mix of novels, travel guides, and old magazines. There was a small kitchen with basic appliances, a table with a few mismatched chairs, and a soft armchair by the fireplace. I set my things down, lit a fire, and settled in. That first night, everything felt calm and peaceful. I cooked a simple meal, listened to some music, and read for a while before falling asleep. The silence was thick but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little creak and snap of wood. Around midnight, I woke up because the wind picked up outside. It rattled the windows and made the trees groan. I lay there listening, trying to focus on the rhythm of the wind instead of the small noises the cabin made. After a while, I drifted back to sleep. The next day, I explored the surrounding woods. The trail started just behind the cabin, winding through dense trees, crossing over small streams and moss-covered rocks. The air was cool and damp, filled with the smell of wet earth and pine needles. The quiet was almost total. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. I found it odd, but didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the time of day. Back at the cabin, I worked on my writing for several hours. The fireplace crackled quietly, and the soft light from a lamp gave the room a warm glow. I felt relaxed, almost too relaxed, like the cabin was wrapping me up in its stillness. Outside, the wind had died down and the woods were calm again. Late that afternoon, I decided to check the cabin's perimeter. I wanted to make sure I knew the area around me in case I wanted to go for another walk. The ground was covered in fallen leaves, and some patches were muddy from earlier rain. I walked around the back of the cabin and noticed something strange. The ground looked disturbed, like someone had been digging. At first, I thought maybe an animal had been at it, but the marks looked too neat. It was like a shallow hole had been started, then abandoned. I couldn't see anything inside the hole. It was too dark and narrow. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the previous guest had tried to bury something or fix something underground. I didn't want to think too much about it. That night, the silence felt different. The usual creaks and groans were quieter, but there were other sounds. Faint, distant noises, like footsteps on dry leaves or a branch snapping far away. Every time I heard one, I froze and listened hard. The noises stopped when I stayed still, but then they would start again somewhere else. It wasn't loud or close, but it was constant. I tried to ignore it, but sleep was difficult. The cabin felt smaller somehow, like it was closing in. When I finally fell asleep, it was with the lights on and the door locked tight. The next morning, I woke early and decided to leave the cabin for a while. I needed to clear my head. I packed a small bag, locked up, and walked down the driveway toward the town. The air felt heavy, and even in the daylight, the woods seemed darker than usual. At the town's small grocery store, I ran into a woman who worked at the tourist information center. I asked her about the cabin and the area. She hesitated before telling me that the land the cabin sat on used to belong to a farmer who disappeared years ago. They never found him, and after a while, the farm was sold off and divided. The cabin was built later on part of the property. Something about what she said didn't sit right with me, but I thanked her and left. On the way back, I stopped at a small hardware store and bought some supplies, a shovel, extra batteries for my flashlight, and a small first aid kit. I figured if I was going to stay a bit longer, I should be prepared. Back at the cabin, I went straight to the spot where I saw the disturbed ground. The hole looked the same, but this time I took the shovel and carefully dug around it. The earth was soft and easy to move, and soon I uncovered the edge of a metal box, rusted and covered in dirt. I hesitated, but pulled it out. The box was old, about the size of a shoebox, with a latch that was stuck tight. After some effort, I managed to pry it open. Inside, there were old papers, some faded photographs, and a small notebook. The papers were farm records and letters, mostly about crops and livestock. The photographs showed a family, a man, a woman, and a few children standing in front of an old farmhouse. The man looked stern, the kind of person who worked hard and didn't waste time. The notebook was a journal. The handwriting was neat, but hurried in places. I read through it slowly. The man had written about strange things happening on the farm. Tools going missing, livestock found injured, noises in the night. He seemed to suspect someone was sneaking onto the property. The entries grew more anxious over time, mentioning figures seen in the woods and the feeling of being watched. The last entry was different. It was dated almost a year before the farmer disappeared. He wrote about someone coming to his door late at night, asking for help. He didn't say who, but he described the visitor as desperate and dangerous. The entry ended abruptly, with the man saying he planned to confront whoever was troubling the farm the next day. I closed the notebook slowly, feeling a chill even though the room was warm. The silence around me seemed to press in tighter. The noises from the previous night echoed in my mind. That night, I stayed inside, locking all the doors and windows. I sat by the fire, reading the journal again, trying to understand what had happened here. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the cabin like before. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not outside, but just beyond the thin walls. Slow, deliberate steps circling the cabin. I held my breath, heart pounding, but I told myself it was probably an animal or the wind moving something. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and for a long minute, there was only silence. Then came a sharp knock on the door. I didn't move. The knocking continued, slow, steady, like someone was testing to see if I was home. My fingers tightened around the book I was holding. After a while, the knocking stopped. I didn't dare look outside. The night felt endless. In the morning, I checked the door and the windows. Everything was locked and intact, but the front door had a fresh scratch near the handle, like someone had tried to force it open. I packed my bags immediately and left. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin through the rearview mirror. The sun was rising, casting long shadows between the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, watching me go. I didn't look back again. The experience stayed with me. The silence, the footsteps, the hidden box with its story of fear and disappearance. It wasn't supernatural, just people, fear, and the way old wounds don't always heal. The cabin was quiet now, but I knew it kept the memory of those who had lived and struggled there. And sometimes, those memories reach out in ways you can't ignore. I never stayed in a place like that again, but I'm glad I found the journal. It gave me the truth, and that was enough. The woods don't hide ghosts, but they hold real stories, sometimes darker than any ghost story you can imagine. The farmhouse was exactly what I thought it would be. Quiet, isolated, tucked away in the middle of rolling fields and trees that stretched far beyond the eye could see. The kind of place that seemed perfect for a writing retreat, a weekend away from city noise and distractions. I had booked online weeks earlier, reading the host description carefully. Peaceful farmhouse surrounded by nature, ideal for writing and reflection. The picture showed a big old house with peeling white paint, a wraparound porch, and windows that looked out onto open fields and distant woods. I liked the rustic feel, the kind of place that wasn't polished or modern, but had character. I thought I'd spend the weekend working on my novel, enjoying the slow pace, and maybe taking a few walks outside. The drive out there was long, but pleasant. The highway eventually gave way to smaller country roads that twisted and turned through fields dotted with cattle and wildflowers. When I pulled up, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the porch. The air smelled of dry earth and pine, crisp and fresh. I carried my bags inside, the wooden floor creaking under my steps. The house smelled faintly of old wood and dust, like it had been closed up for a while, but wasn't unpleasant. I set my bags down in the small bedroom at the front of the house and started unpacking my laptop, notebooks, and pens. The first day was easy. I made a pot of coffee, sat by the window, and started writing. The quiet was a relief, broken only by the occasional bird call or the distant hum of a tractor. At night, I lit a few candles, made a simple dinner in the tiny kitchen, and settled in with a book. The porch light cast a soft glow onto the grass outside, and I felt safe and calm. The farmhouse had no internet, which I had expected, but there was a cell signal strong enough for texts and calls. I told a few friends I'd be off the grid, and that was the last I heard from them for the day. On the morning of the second day, the sun filtered through the cotton curtains and woke me up early. I stretched and made coffee again, eager to get back to my writing. The house felt colder than the day before, like a chill that seeped through the walls. I shrugged it off as just the early morning air and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through my notebook. Around mid-morning, I heard a knock on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a man stood there. He looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a jacket that had clearly seen better days. His face was weathered from years spent outdoors, but his eyes were sharp and serious. He introduced himself as a neighbor who lived down the road. I invited him inside, and he didn't stay long, just enough to warn me. "There's been someone watching the house at night," he said quietly. "You alone?" I nodded. "Good. Don't go outside if you hear whistling," he warned before leaving as quickly as he'd come. His words stuck with me, but I tried to push them aside. It was probably just some kids playing tricks or maybe a neighbor out walking their dog. Still, I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows that afternoon, making sure everything was secure. I even closed the curtains, a habit I didn't usually have but felt right in that moment. That night, after dinner, I sat on the porch with a book. The sky was clear, full of stars that seemed unusually bright in the dark countryside. The silence was thick, almost heavy. Then I heard it, a soft whistling, almost tuneless, drifting on the breeze. It was faint at first, almost like a trick of the wind, but it grew louder and seemed to circle the house, coming from different directions. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whistling didn't sound friendly or casual. It was slow and irregular, like someone was trying to get my attention or maybe trying to intimidate me. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just stayed on the porch, eyes scanning the dark woods that surrounded the farmhouse. After what felt like an eternity, the whistling stopped. The silence returned, deeper and more complete than before. I went inside quickly, locking the door behind me. I checked the windows again, pulling the curtains tightly shut. I didn't sleep well that night, listening for any sounds, imagining footsteps or voices just outside. The next morning, I stepped outside and immediately noticed something strange. Right outside every door of the house were small piles of dirt. They were neat, like someone had scooped earth out of the ground and dropped it there on purpose. There were 5 piles in total, one by the front door, one by the back door, one at the side entrance, and 2 by the sliding doors that opened onto the porch. I knelt down to look closer. The dirt looked fresh, loose, and not like it had come from natural settling or wind. It was as if someone had dug tiny holes in the ground, just enough to fill a small handful of earth and place it there. I had no idea what to make of it. My mind raced through possible explanations. Animal digging, construction work nearby, maybe a gardener. But the dirt wasn't scattered or messy. It was too deliberate. All day I tried to focus on writing, but I kept glancing outside. The house felt different now, less like a retreat and more like a place under watch. I checked the locks obsessively and kept the porch light on well past sunset. That night, I was hesitant to step outside again. I sat by the window, the curtains parted just enough to see the yard. The whistling came again, softer this time, but still clearly there, circling the house. It didn't seem to come from one spot, but moved around like the person whistling was walking the perimeter slowly. I stayed inside, my back against the door. I wanted to call the neighbor, but I had no idea how to explain the feeling building inside me, like I wasn't just being watched, but being marked. The dirt piles outside the doors felt like warnings, and the whistling was a way to remind me I wasn't alone. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I didn't want to spend another night there. The farmhouse that had seemed so peaceful now felt like a trap, and I didn't want to find out what might happen if I stayed. Before I left, I took pictures of the dirt piles and texted them to the neighbor. I asked him if anyone else had experienced this, if there was anything I should know. He replied briefly, saying some people had been causing trouble in the area, sneaking around at night, but no one knew why. I locked the door behind me and drove away without looking back. The farmhouse disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed up by the trees and fields. I didn't write much during those days, but the experience stayed with me. The feeling of being watched, the whistling that wasn't just a sound, and the small piles of dirt, quiet and unsettling, left outside every door. The first night I arrived at the old Victorian house, I was immediately struck by the atmosphere. It stood at the edge of a quiet, tree-lined street in a small town I barely knew. The house was beautiful in an aged sort of way. Tall windows with chipped paint on the frames, a wrought iron fence that had rusted over time, and a heavy wooden door that creaked when I opened it. The owner had called it charming, and I was willing to overlook the peeling wallpaper and the slightly musty smell for a good deal on the rent. Inside, the house was dimly lit with antique lamps, and the floors creaked under every step. It felt like stepping back into another century, which I found a little unsettling, but also strangely comforting. I've been traveling for work and needed a place to stay for a few weeks, and this Airbnb seemed perfect, quiet, inexpensive, and full of character. I had the entire second floor to myself, with a bedroom, a small sitting room, and a bathroom down the hall. The first evening passed without incident. I unpacked my bags, made myself some tea, and settled down with a book in the sitting room. The heating was an old system, powered by ducts that ran through the walls and floors, and I could hear the faint hiss and occasional clatter as it kicked on and off. It was noisy enough to remind me the house was old, but not loud enough to bother me. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard something else, a soft whispering noise coming from the heating vent near the ceiling. I thought it might be the air moving through the ducts, or maybe some kind of settling noise the house made. The whispering was faint, like a breath of wind or a half-remembered conversation just out of reach. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the house settling and my imagination playing tricks. The next day, I made a point to check the vent closely, but it looked normal. The metal grill was slightly loose at one corner, and the duct behind it was dark and empty, just like I expected. I pressed on the grill to make sure it was secure, and it gave a little but didn't come off. I decided to leave it be. That second night, the whispering was back. This time, it felt a little louder, but still not clear enough to make out any words. I lay still in the dark, heart beating a little faster. I told myself again it was the house, old pipes, or maybe the wind outside playing tricks through the cracks. The quiet street made every sound sharper, and I tried not to listen too hard. By the third night, I was starting to feel uneasy. Around midnight, the whispering began again, but this time it was different. It was clearer. I could hear a voice, quiet but unmistakable, and it said my name. Just my name, like someone was right there, speaking through the vent. I sat up in bed, the sheets tangled around me, trying to convince myself it was some kind of trick, maybe a loose part of the duct making sounds and my tired brain shaped into words. I stayed awake for a long time after that, listening closely. The whispering stopped after a while, and the house fell silent again except for the usual creaks and the distant sound of cars passing on the main road. When I finally got up, I checked the vent again, feeling a little braver but still nervous. I ran my fingers along the metal grill, feeling for any signs that someone could be inside the duct. Nothing. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I grabbed a screwdriver from the small toolbox the owner had left in the kitchen and went to the vent. The metal grill was held in place with a few screws that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. I worked slowly, careful not to damage anything. The air around me felt colder, and the house was too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. When I finally pulled the grill off, I expected to see nothing but an empty dark duct. Instead, tucked in the corner behind the metal slats, was a small black device. It It looked like a wireless speaker about the size of my palm, and next to it, a tiny lens, a webcam, was carefully hidden, pointed directly into the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I stared at the devices, the reality sinking in. Someone had been watching me and talking to me in real time through the vent. They had set up a way to spy on me and speak without ever being seen. I took a step back and looked around the room. Nothing else seemed out of place. The door was locked, the windows shut tight. I didn't hear or see anyone. Panic started to rise, but I tried to keep calm. I grabbed my phone and called the Airbnb owner. The line rang, and when they answered, I was careful to keep my voice steady. I told her what I found and asked if anyone had a key or had been in the house recently. The owner said no, they had not given any other keys out, and no one should have been inside. I told them I was coming home right away and hung up. I didn't want to stay in that house for one more second. I packed quickly, not bothering to bring much. As I pulled out the speaker and the camera, I realized how long someone might have been watching me without my knowing it. The thought made my skin crawl. On my way out, I looked carefully at the street and the neighbors' houses. No one was outside. No one appeared to be watching. I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath, stepping into the bright morning sun. The air felt fresher outside, safer. I reported everything to the local police. They came to the house, took the devices as evidence, and assured me they would investigate. The owner apologized and said they would remove the listing immediately. I haven't stayed in an Airbnb since then. The thought that someone could be so close, watching and listening without my knowledge, still haunts me. I don't know who set up the camera or why, but I'm grateful I found it before it went any further. That old Victorian house looked charming from the outside, but inside, it held a secret that made me feel more afraid than any ghost story ever could. The real horror wasn't supernatural. It was real, close, and terrifying. And I never want to experience anything like it again. I booked the house online without much thought. The funeral was going to be hard enough without the added stress of where to stay. The house looked normal, simple really, in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Clean lawn, tidy flower beds, nothing out of place. I thought it'd be a good spot to keep things low-key, just a place to sleep and get ready for the service. When I arrived, the street was quiet, mostly neat little homes lined up one after another. The kind of place where everyone knows each other but keeps to themselves. I pulled up to the driveway and saw the house right away. It was a two-story with white siding and dark green shutters, a small porch with a couple of chairs. The front yard was freshly mowed and the windows were clean. The air smelled faintly of pine and something else, like freshly baked bread, or maybe the faint scent of air freshener. I unlocked the front door with the code the host had sent me and stepped inside. The house was just as clean as the photos showed. The floors were polished wood, and the furniture was simple but comfortable. The living room had a couch and a few armchairs arranged around a coffee table. The kitchen was bright, with sunlight spilling through the windows onto the counters. Everything looked cared for, almost too perfect. I set my bags down and started to look around. I was tired, drained from the trip, so I thought I'd just freshen up and lie down for a bit before the service tomorrow. But then, something caught my eye on the wall in the hallway. A cluster of framed photographs hung neatly in a row. I stopped and looked closer. At first, I thought it was just a regular family. Smiling faces, birthday parties, holidays, dog playing in the yard. But then my heart skipped. It was the same family as mine. The dad in the pictures had the exact same build, the same rough hands, the same smile my father had. The brother looked just like my older brother, even down to the way he laughed in those pictures. And the dog, our old golden retriever from childhood, was there too, chasing a ball in one photo, lying by the fireplace in another. I stared at the photos longer than I should have. My own face wasn't in any of them. That part felt wrong. How could this be the same family if I wasn't there? The photos looked like they were taken over many years. There were pictures of kids growing up, but not me. I know every family photo we ever had. My parents never left me out. My face should be in some of these pictures, but there was nothing. My stomach tightened. I pulled out my phone and found the host number. I called. The line rang once, twice, And then a voice finally answered, stammered something I didn't catch, and then the call cut off. I tried calling again. This time, no answer, just a busy tone. I left a message, but there was no reply. That night, I tried to sleep but kept thinking about the photos. How was it possible for this family to look exactly like mine, but not include me? The house was quiet, too quiet. I thought maybe I was just tired, maybe overthinking things. I closed my eyes and tried to push the thoughts away. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I woke up because the room felt colder than before. I opened my eyes slowly, and right there on the nightstand was a new framed photo. I didn't recognize it at first, but then I saw it clearly. It was a picture of me sleeping in this very bed. The picture was recent. My face was peaceful, eyes closed, everything just as I was now. My heart pounded. I sat up quickly, almost knocking the frame over. I grabbed the photo and looked at it closely. It was definitely me. The angle was exactly as if someone was standing next to the bed taking the picture. I looked around the room, but no one was there. The door was shut tight and the windows were locked. I wanted to scream or call someone, but I stayed silent, afraid of what might happen if I made a noise. The logical part of me was screaming that this was impossible. How did someone get into the house without me knowing? How had they taken this photo without waking me up? Why would someone want to scare me like this? I put the photo down and sat on the edge of the bed. I tried to think about what to do next. The first thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this house another night. I wanted to pack up and leave right then, but it was dark, and I didn't want to carry my bags through the quiet house in the middle of the night. Instead, I grabbed my phone and checked the front door lock. It was secure, no sign of forced entry. I walked around the house, checking every door and window again. Everything was locked and seemed normal. No footprints in the yard, no broken locks, no sign someone had been inside, except for the photo. That was the only thing that didn't make sense. I sat back down on the bed, clutching the photo in my hands. I tried to calm down, telling myself maybe the photo had been there earlier, and I just didn't notice it. But no, I was sure I would have seen it. I checked the nightstand several times before going to bed. I stared at the picture until dawn. When the first light came through the window, I carefully put the photo in my bag and locked the bedroom door. I didn't want to leave it behind. I decided I'd call the police once I got back into town. Morning came, and the neighborhood woke up. People started mowing lawns, kids riding bikes, the usual suburban sounds. I packed quickly, my hands trembling a bit, and left the house without looking back. I still didn't understand what happened or why the photos of my family were on the walls, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Later that day, I drove to the funeral, trying to shake off the unease. The house was supposed to be a place to rest, a quiet place for grieving, but it ended up feeling like a trap. The photos, the silence, the strange call from the host who never explained anything. It all felt too strange. When I got home, I tried to find the listing online again, but the house had been removed. The website said it was no longer available, no reviews, no pictures. It was like it never existed on the site. I called the police and explained everything. The photos, the strange call, the picture on the nightstand. They told me they would check it out, but when they went to the address, the house was empty and abandoned. No furniture, no signs of recent visitors, just an empty shell. It was the strangest experience I've ever had. I still don't know who lived there or why the photos looked like my family, but left me out. The only thing I'm sure of is that I was never supposed to be there. That house was a stranger's, but someone wanted me to feel like it was mine, or maybe remind me that I didn't belong. I'm still shaken when I think about it, especially when I look at old family photos now. I check them carefully, making sure I'm there, making sure I belong where I think I do. Because for one night, in that quiet suburban house, I wasn't sure anymore. I arrived just before dusk. The Airbnb was supposed to be a quiet place to rest, away from the noise and stress of the city. I've been working long hours, feeling burnout, and needed a break. When I booked it, the pictures looked perfect. A small cabin on the edge of a forest, with tall trees all around, and a little porch where I could sit with a cup of coffee in the morning. The host was polite and quick with messages, which made me feel more comfortable going there alone. The drive to the rental was longer than I expected. The GPS led me down a narrow, winding road, with trees pressing in on both sides like a wall. The sun was low, turning the sky pink and orange. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, but also how isolated. There were no other cars, no houses in sight, and the radio in my car only caught static. I felt a small shiver, not from cold, but from the silence. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the cabin was exactly like the pictures, simple wooden with a sloped roof and a chimney that promised a fireplace inside. I parked, grabbed my bags, and unlocked the door with the code the host had sent me. The inside smelled faintly of wood and cleaning spray. It was cozy, with a small living room, a kitchen area, a bedroom, and a bathroom. There were no other people around, just me and the quiet of the forest outside. I unpacked quickly, wanting to get settled before it got too dark. I made myself some dinner using the small stove and sat by the window, watching the last light fade through the trees. The silence was deep. No cars, no dogs barking, not even birds singing. It felt almost too quiet, but I told myself that was what I wanted, the chance to get away and hear nothing but my own thoughts. After dinner, I lit a fire in the small fireplace. The flames flickered and cast shadows on the wooden walls. I sat there with a book, but my eyes kept drifting to the window. Outside, the darkness was thick. The trees looked like tall black shapes. The only sound was the crackling fire and my own breathing. Around 10, I decided to get ready for bed. The bedroom was small but warm, with thick curtains over the window. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and climbed under the covers. The silence pressed against me. It was so quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the wooden house settling. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, a soft knock. Not at the door, but at the window beside the bed. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. Another knock, slow and deliberate. I held my breath and strained to see through the curtains, but the glass was fog from the heat inside. The knocking stopped. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a branch hitting the window in the wind. But there was no wind. The trees stood still. The silence outside was total. I got up carefully and pulled the curtain aside. The forest was black, the trees just shapes in the darkness. Nothing was there. I checked the window lock. It was secure. I tried to calm down, telling myself I was just tired and imagining things. Back in bed, I waited, eyes wide open. Minutes passed. No more knocking. I began to relax and finally fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I didn't know why at first. Then I heard again, the sound of footsteps. Not outside, but inside the cabin. Soft, slow steps on the wooden floor. I froze under the covers, heart pounding. The footsteps moved from the living room toward the kitchen, slow and steady. I stayed quiet, trying to think. Who could it be? The host had made it clear I was the only guest. I didn't hear a door opening or closing, no creak from the front door. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door. I could hear the wood floor creak under the weight. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, moving back toward the living room. Then nothing. I lay there, too scared to move, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning finally came, I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept listening for sounds, but the cabin was silent again. I got up slowly and checked every door and window. All were locked and secure. The front door had no signs of being opened. It was like whoever or whatever had walked around inside the cabin without touching the doors. I went to the kitchen and poured myself some coffee. My hands shook as I held the cup. I tried to think clearly. Maybe the host had forgotten to mention something, like a caretaker or someone who lived nearby. But there was no cell signal to call anyone, no way to contact help. The nearest town was miles away. I decided to pack up and leave as soon as possible. But before I could finish, I heard it again, this time outside the cabin. A slow, soft thud, thud, thud on the wooden porch. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and opened the door just a crack. The porch was empty. No footprints in the fresh dirt leading up to the steps. I stepped outside and shone the light into the trees. Nothing moved. The silence was total. I closed the door and locked it behind me. I sat down on the porch steps, trying to calm myself. The sun was rising now. and the forest looked less frightening in the daylight. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I spent the day trying to ignore everything. I cleaned the cabin, made a plan to leave, and checked the GPS for the fastest route back to the main road. But the whole time, I kept hearing strange noises, branches snapping far away, the sound of footsteps crunching in the leaves. Every time I looked out the window, I saw nothing but trees. That night, I stayed up until dawn. I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the window with the flashlight in my hand, watching the darkness. I didn't hear any knocking or footsteps inside the cabin, but every little noise outside made my heart race. The next morning, I was packed and ready to leave. I double-checked the locks, grabbed my bags, and stepped outside. As I walked to my car, I noticed something strange. In the dirt near the porch steps were footprints, small like a person walking carefully. They weren't there when I arrived. They led away from the cabin and disappeared into the forest. I felt cold. Whoever had been here was still close. I locked the door one last time, got in my car, and started the engine. As I drove down the narrow road, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway and found a gas station with a phone. I called the host and told them I was leaving early because I felt unsafe. They apologized and said no one else was supposed to be on the property and they would check with the neighbors. After that, I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if someone had been watching me or sneaking around the cabin at night. I just wanted to get home. Later, when I told a friend about it, they said maybe someone used the cabin to hide or squat and didn't want to be seen. That made sense. The forest was thick, the road was hidden, and it was easy for someone to sneak in without being noticed. I realized how important it is to trust your gut. Even if everything looks fine, sometimes being alone in a place like that can be dangerous. Now, I always double-check the reviews and talk to the host before booking a place. And I never stay somewhere alone if I feel uneasy. That trip taught me something simple but important. Safety comes first, and sometimes the scariest things don't come from ghosts or stories. They come from real people in real situations, hidden in the quiet dark. I arrived at the small town just before sunset, tired from the long drive. The GPS had led me to a quiet neighborhood, where the streets were lined with old trees and weathered houses. The place I was renting was an Airbnb, a small two-story house that looked like it had been there for decades. The listing had promised a cozy stay, close to the town center, but still private. The pictures looked nice enough. White paint peeling a little, flower beds out front, a wooden porch with a swing. I didn't expect much, just a place to rest for the weekend while I worked on my writing. When I pulled up, the owner was already there, standing near the porch. He was a tall, thin man, probably in his late 50s or early 60s. His skin was pale, and his eyes looked tired but sharp. He wore an old brown jacket, even though it wasn't that cold yet. He didn't smile, but he nodded as I got out of the car. There was something off about him, though I couldn't say what exactly. Maybe it was the way he stood, still and stiff, or the quiet that hung around him like a shadow. He showed me inside and handed me the keys without much talk. The house smelled like old wood and something else, like damp earth mixed with dust. The living room was small but tidy. The furniture was outdated, heavy wooden pieces with thick upholstery. I put my bag down and looked around. There were a few books on the shelf, all old and worn, mostly about local history and some old farming guides. The kitchen was tiny but clean, with a small table by the window. Outside, I could see the garden through the glass, mostly weeds and a few dying flowers. The bedroom was upstairs. It had one window that faced the street and a small dresser. The mattress looked firm but uncomfortable. I unpacked a little, set up my laptop, and got ready to settle in for the night. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the trees, and the sky was a dull gray. That night, I barely slept. The house made strange noises. The floorboards creaked as if someone was walking around, even though I was alone. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind. But every time I heard those noises, my heart jumped. I kept checking the lock on the front door, making sure it was secure. The next morning, I went out to explore the town, hoping to shake off the uneasy feeling. When I came back in the afternoon, the owner was outside again, working in the garden. I nodded politely as I walked up to the porch. He didn't look up or respond. Inside, I noticed something strange. The calendar on the wall had the days crossed off, but it was stuck on a date from months ago. I thought it was odd, but maybe he just forgot to change it. Then, I saw a stack of newspapers on the kitchen counter, but they were all old issues, some from a year ago. Over the next day, I started paying more attention to the house and the owner. He didn't leave the property much. I saw him walking around the garden, trimming the bushes with slow, careful movements. Sometimes he would stand by the window and watch the street for a long time without blinking. There were no visitors, no mail deliveries, no sign of life around the place except us. At night, the noises got worse. I heard footsteps upstairs, but I was already in the bedroom. Sometimes I heard scratching sound from the walls, like something trying to get out or in. The lights in the hallway flickered occasionally, but there was no rain or wind outside. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself it was an old house. One evening, I found a small door in the basement I hadn't noticed before. It was hidden behind some boxes and covered in cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I pulled it open carefully. The door led to a narrow, dark tunnel, just wide enough to squeeze through. It smelled musty and cold. I shone my phone's flashlight inside, but could only see a few feet before the darkness swallowed the rest. I closed the door quickly, feeling a chill run down my spine. I had no idea what the tunnel led to, but I didn't want to find out. The owner never mentioned it. The next day, I tried to get out early to explore more of the town and forget about the house. But as I was packing up my things, the owner appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me. His face looked harder than before, like a stone mask. I felt my skin crawl. I left without a word. That afternoon, I decided I couldn't stay another night. I packed my bags quickly and went outside in my car. The owner was in the garden again, but this time he didn't move or look up. I got in and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced back at the house. The windows were dark, except one on the second floor where I thought I saw a shadow move. The house looked empty, but I knew it wasn't. Something about that place was wrong, and I was glad to leave it behind. Later, I called Airbnb to report my experience. They told me the owner had other listings, but hadn't had complaints like mine before. When I checked again, the listing was gone. It had been taken down without explanation. I never went back to that town or that house. Even now, months later, I still think about the small door in the basement and what might be hidden behind it. The silence, the strange noises, and the way the owner watched without speaking. Some things just don't feel right, and you can't ignore that feeling. I learned to trust mine that weekend. The moment we pulled up to the house in Boise, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. It was late afternoon, and the summer sun was dipping low behind the mountains. The house was big, way bigger than I expected for a simple weekend getaway. It sat quietly on a quiet street, surrounded by old pine trees that cast long shadows across the yard. The lawn was perfectly trimmed, and flowers lined the walkway leading to the front door. It looked like one of those places you see in magazines about cozy, peaceful homes in small-town America. My partner and I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. We needed a break from the city, from work, from everything. The plan was simple: rent a nice place, cook good food, maybe explore some local hiking trails, and just relax. We weren't expecting anything fancy, just a calm place to unwind. The photos online showed a spacious, clean, bright home with lots of windows and a cozy living room with a fireplace. Perfect. But as we got out of the car, I noticed something off right away. There was a quietness to the neighborhood that felt too still, like it was holding its breath. Not a car passed by, not a dog barked, not a single person was outside. The house itself looked well kept, but it didn't feel welcoming. The windows on the front looked dark, and the door had no visible doorbell. I reached out and knocked, but there was no answer. We had been told by the booking site to just let ourselves in and the host would contact us later. We let ourselves in, bags in hand. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of cleaning products mixed with something earthy, like old wood and damp stone. The hallway was long and narrow, painted in a dull cream color with cheap carpet that muffled our footsteps. It was quieter inside than outside. Somehow, the place had a strange kind of silence, like it was waiting for something. We wandered into the living room. It was bigger than expected, with a large leather couch, a big TV on the wall, and tall windows facing the backyard. Sunlight spilled in, but the room still felt cold and empty. There were a few small personal touches, a stack of magazines on the coffee table, a half-finished puzzle on the side table, but nothing that made it feel lived in or welcoming. No family photos, no clutter, no signs of real life. Then, I noticed the stairs leading down to the basement. Our reservation had clearly said we would have a large upstairs bedroom with a nice view, but when I checked the booking confirmation again on my phone, it mentioned a basement room. I shrugged and told myself maybe the photos were outdated or the host had made a mistake in the listing. We found the basement door at the end of the hallway, near the kitchen. It was heavy and old, painted the same dull cream color as the walls. When I opened it, a rush of colder air hit me, as if the basement had been closed up for a long time. The stairs creaked under our feet as we descended. The walls were bare concrete, and the only light came from a dim ceiling bulb that flickered occasionally. The room at the bottom was surprisingly spacious, maybe bigger than our apartment back home. It had one small window near the ceiling that looked out onto the backyard, but it was covered in dust and grime. The furniture was sparse. A large bed pushed against the far wall, a small wooden dresser, and a folding chair. The sheets looked clean but smelled faintly of mildew. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. We put down our bags and tried to shake off the weird feeling settling in. My partner lit a few candles to warm the space, and I opened the window a crack to let some fresh air in. Outside, the street was still silent. No cars, no footsteps, no signs of life. We decided to explore the rest of the house. Upstairs, we found a few locked doors, and the place was dusty in places, like it hadn't been used regularly. There was an odd smell in some rooms, something like damp fabric mixed with old wood smoke. It was clear someone had been living there recently, but no one was around now. That evening, we cooked dinner in the kitchen. The appliances were old but functional, and the cupboards had mismatched dishes and a few cans of food left behind. While washing up, I noticed a door at the back of the kitchen leading to a small room with a water heater and a dog crate inside. It was empty, but I remembered the listing didn't mention a dog. I asked my partner if they had seen anything about a pet in the reservation. They hadn't. The house felt more like a storage place than a vacation home. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from the host. The text was strange, short, almost clipped, and said, "You're in the wrong room. Basement isn't yours. Host knows. Dog they're not supposed to be. Contact me." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Who else was in the house? Why had we been put in the basement? I tried calling the host back, but there was no answer. My partner and I exchanged uneasy looks. Later that night, we tried to sleep, but the basement felt suffocating. The air was stale, and the silence was so thick it pressed against our ears. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it, soft footsteps moving across the floor, right next to the bed. My eyes shot open. I sat up and looked around. Nothing. No one there. I told myself it was probably just the house settling, or maybe my imagination running wild. But then I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing right beside us. My partner was frozen too. Neither of us said a word. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, but the basement window didn't let in much light. The beam cut through the darkness, but the room was empty. Still, the footsteps kept coming closer to the bed, then stopped right at the edge. I pulled the covers up over my head and whispered to my partner that we needed to get out. We packed our bags in a hurry, trying not to make any noise. The whole time, I felt eyes watching us from the shadows. The basement was no longer just cold, it felt hostile. We crept upstairs and out of the house without turning on any lights. The front door shut behind us with a heavy thud, and I swear I heard a faint rustling from the back rooms, like something or someone was moving inside. In the car, we sat in silence. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone watching us from the window. We didn't wait for the host to call back. We just left. As we drove away, the house disappeared into the dark behind us, but but the feeling stayed. It was like the place had eyes that followed us, like the house itself was alive and aware of our presence. We didn't stop until we were miles away, out of the neighborhood and back on the busy highway. Looking back, it's clear we were not just assigned the wrong room. We had been given access to a part of the house we weren't meant to see. The host's message hinted at secrets we couldn't understand fully. And the presence in that basement, the footsteps, the cold watching feeling, was real but not supernatural. It was something human, something aware and waiting. We never went back, never contacted the host again, and never rented from that site for a house stay in Boise. What happened that night was a sharp reminder. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, but the unknown, the mistakes we don't catch until it's too late, and the people we never meet who might be watching from just out of sight. I moved into the basement apartment of an old house in eastern Maine during the early fall. The place was cheap and simple, just what I needed while I worked a temporary job nearby. It wasn't fancy, low ceilings, a tiny kitchen, a little living room with a sagging couch, and one bedroom down the narrow hallway. The basement felt cold and dark compared to the rest of the house, but I told myself that was normal for basements. I wasn't planning to stay long anyway, just a couple of months. The house itself was old, probably built around the early 1900s. The wood floors creaked, the walls were thin, and the paint peeled in places. The landlord said the basement apartment had its own separate entrance and was private, but there was one shared door inside the house that connected the upstairs to the basement. The landlord said he never went down there unless he had to fix something, which made me feel better. At first, everything seemed normal. I settled in, unpacked a few boxes, and tried to get comfortable. The basement was dim, with only a few small windows near the ceiling that let in faint light. It had a damp smell, but I ran a space heater and kept the windows open for a bit to air it out. The ceiling was low enough that I had to duck in some spots, and the hallway leading from the front door of the apartment to the bedroom was narrow and long. It was down that hallway where I first noticed something odd. At the very end of the hallway, opposite my bedroom door, there was another door. The door was unusual because instead of being solid wood like the others, it looked like a large mirror. A big rectangle that covered almost the entire door, reflecting the dim basement hallway back at me. It was clean and smooth and looked like a mirror at first glance, but the frame around it was old, weathered, and a little chipped. I didn't give it much thought at first. I assumed it was some kind of closet or maybe an old utility room. But the door never seemed to open, and the landlord had never mentioned any extra rooms down there. A few days in, I got curious. I decided to check it out more closely when no one else was around. I walked down the hallway slowly, my footsteps echoing softly in the quiet basement. The space heater hummed behind me, making the air warm and dry. I reached the mirror door and stood in front of it, staring at my own reflection. I noticed something strange. The mirror didn't quite reflect the hallway behind me perfectly. It seemed off. I pressed my hand against the glass-like surface. It didn't feel like regular glass. It was colder than I expected and felt a little thicker. I tried knocking lightly with my knuckles, expecting a hollow sound like a closet door, but it sounded solid and dense like a wall. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, angling the light at different spots on the door. I tried to see if there was a keyhole, a handle, or any sign that it could open. Nothing. The door was perfectly flat, seamless, and unbreakable looking. Then I noticed a tiny crack in the wood frame near the top. It was just a small chip in the paint, but through it I caught a glimpse of a dark space behind the door. Something wasn't right. The next night, I decided to try something. I turned off all the lights in the basement apartment and sat quietly in the living room. The only light came from the street lamp outside the small basement window, faint but steady. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the mirror door again, my heart beating a little faster. I pressed my eye against the surface carefully. The door wasn't just a mirror, it was a one-way mirror. Behind it was a dark room, and through the glass, I could see shadows moving faintly. I couldn't make out any shapes clearly, but I knew someone was on the other side watching me. That realization hit me like a cold wave. I stepped back quickly, my breath shallow. Who would have a one-way mirror in the basement of a rental apartment? Who was watching and why? I felt exposed, like someone was spying on me constantly without my knowledge. The basement suddenly felt suffocating. My sense of safety shattered. For the rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening carefully to every sound. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I imagined someone peering at me from behind that mirror, watching my every move while I was supposed to be alone. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought heavy-duty wooden planks and some nails. I spent hours barring up that door. I hammered the boards across the frame, blocking the mirror completely. I didn't want to look at it anymore, and I didn't want anyone watching me. After that, I tried to get on with my days, but the unease lingered. Every time I walked down the hallway, I felt the weight of the hidden room behind the wall. I realized I had no idea what was in that room, or how long it had been there, or why. One evening, I was sitting on the couch when I heard soft footsteps above me, like someone walking slowly back and forth. I reminded myself the house was old, the floors creaked, and the landlord or his family might be upstairs. But then I heard a sound like a key turning in a lock, soft, deliberate. I remembered the door upstairs that connected to the basement. Was someone coming down? Were they checking on the basement? Had they known about the mirror all along? I locked my apartment door from the inside and kept the planks nailed across the mirror door. I started double-checking every lock and window every night before bed. I didn't tell anyone about the mirror, not even the landlord, because I was afraid no one would believe me or that it would cause trouble. Days passed with no incidents, but my paranoia grew. I felt trapped in my own apartment, like I was being watched even when I thought I was alone. One afternoon, I decided to check the outside entrance to the basement apartment. The door was solid and locked tight. I noticed that the old house had thick walls and a strange layout, rooms and passages that didn't quite make sense. I peeked through a cracked window near the stairs and saw a small, dark crawl space behind the basement walls. I realized that the room behind the mirror door was probably this crawl space or a hidden utility room. But the fact it had a one-way mirror was terrifying. Someone had gone out of their way to build it, to be able to watch the basement apartment without being seen. I wondered if the landlord knew. Maybe it was a previous owner or a squatter. Or maybe it was part of some strange surveillance setup. I didn't stay much longer after that. I packed up and moved out the next week. The moment I left, the feeling of being watched disappeared. Looking back, I still don't know who was behind that mirror or how long they had been watching. I never found any cameras or devices, but the mirror itself was proof enough. That basement apartment taught me that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or legends. They're the real people who invade your privacy and make you feel unsafe in your own home. I've never stayed anywhere without checking every door, every window, every dark corner since then. And I never want to be caught off guard like that again. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip to Iowa, a chance to escape the noise of the city and do something nice for my sister's birthday. She planned a surprise party at my uncle's old house, the kind of place you imagine when you think about small-town homes. Creaky floors, old wooden doors, and a porch swing that squeaked in the wind. Nothing fancy, but homey. The whole family was coming, and we had agreed to bring everything we needed for the party, including extra tables and chairs to fit everyone. My brother and I were assigned the job of grabbing an extra table from the basement of the house. We arrived a little early, before the rest of the guests, and went inside with the boxes and party supplies we'd packed. The basement door was just off the kitchen, down a narrow flight of wooden stairs. I remember thinking how dark it looked, even though the sun was shining bright outside through the kitchen windows. The door to the basement was painted an old, peeling green, the kind of paint that had been there for decades. We headed down the stairs, the wood creaking under our boots. The air got colder and damper immediately. There was a faint smell of mildew, mixed with something else, harder to identify, a metallic, almost sharp scent, like old water pipes rusting away. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and tools scattered on shelves along the walls. The light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered weakly, casting long, dancing shadows that moved every time the bulb buzzed. I glanced at my brother. He looked uneasy, which made me feel a little more alert. wasn't like us to be jumpy. I thought maybe it was just the weird feeling basements always give you, that mix of being underground and surrounded by things long forgotten. But as we walked further in, the air seemed heavier, almost pressing down on us, like the basement itself didn't want us there. We found the table quickly, a folding one, a bit rusty around the edges, but sturdy enough. As I lifted one side, I felt a chill run up my spine. I paused, listening. There was a faint noise, like the soft hum of something mechanical, coming from the far corner of the basement. At first, I thought it might be the old furnace, but it wasn't warm. The noise was steady, low, almost rhythmic, like a machine working in slow, deliberate cycles. I looked toward the sound and saw the washing machine. It was an old model, white with yellowed edges, clearly from another decade. The lid was closed and it was running. I was sure it wasn't on when we came in. Neither of us had turned it on, and no one else had been in the house to do it. The basement was too quiet. Otherwise, no people, no footsteps, just that washing machine humming away. My brother and I exchanged a look. We both felt it then, the strange weight in the air, the eerie quiet that made every small sound stand out. The hum of the machine became almost hypnotic, pulling us deeper into that uncomfortable space. We didn't say anything, just packed up the table as quickly as we could. But the unease lingered, clinging to our skin like a cold sweat. On the way back upstairs, I noticed the basement door felt heavier than before, almost as if it was resisting us leaving. The latch made a sharp sound when I closed it, echoing in the empty hallway. Upstairs, the house was bright and warm, filled with sunlight streaming through the windows. The contrast was sudden and stark. It was like stepping out of a different world. Later that evening, after the party had started and everyone was busy laughing and eating, I couldn't shake the feeling of the basement. I kept thinking about the washing machine running on its own, about how quiet everything was down there. I finally asked my uncle about it, but he just shook his head and said it was probably a faulty timer or some old wiring acting up. He told me the basement sometimes gave him the creeps too, but he never really thought much about it. The house was old, after all. Still, I couldn't let it go. I kept hearing that hum in my mind, like the basement was alive somehow, and we had disturbed something by going down there. It wasn't ghosts or anything supernatural, just the house settling or a machine acting strangely, but the feeling of being watched, of something unseen, was what stuck with me the most. It wasn't fear of ghosts. It was a deep, unsettling awareness that some places just hold onto the past in ways you can't explain. I went back to the basement once more before we left Iowa during the day this time. The air was still cold and musty. The washing machine wasn't running, but the silence was heavier than before, almost suffocating. I stood there for a long time, feeling that same pressure pressing down on me, and I realized it wasn't just the basement. It was the house itself, a place built by generations, full of stories and lives that never fully left. When we finally drove away from the house, the sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. I looked back once and saw the basement window open just a crack, letting the cool evening air in. Maybe the house was just old and strange, or maybe some things you can't understand with logic alone. But one thing was clear to me. Some places keep their secrets hidden in the silence, in the cold, dark spaces we don't want to visit. And sometimes, even when you're just trying to do something simple like grab a table for a party, those secrets reach out in the quiet hum of a washing machine running on its own, reminding you that you're never really alone in a place like that. The summer had just started, and my family and I decided to take a vacation to Florida. It was something we talked about for months, a chance to get away from the busy city life and enjoy some warm sun and relaxation. We found an Airbnb that looked perfect online, a small, cozy house near the beach with big windows, a neat yard, and all the amenities we wanted. The photos showed a bright living room, clean bedrooms, and a kitchen stocked with everything we could need. It was a bit cheaper than most hotels, and since we were staying for a whole week, the price made an easy choice. When we arrived, the house looked exactly like the pictures. The owner had left a welcome note with some local recommendations, and everything was spotless. We unloaded the car and started settling in. My wife unpacked the kids' clothes. I set up some beach gear in the corner, and the kids were already running around, exploring the yard. It felt good to be somewhere new, but quiet. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat down in the living room with my wife to plan the next day. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioner. I glanced up at the ceiling and noticed the smoke detector. It was a standard round device, white, sitting flush against the ceiling. But something caught my eye, a tiny hole near the edge of the smoke detector. At first, I thought it was just part of the design, maybe a small vent or something. But the hole was too perfect and small, almost like a pinhole. I mentioned it to my wife, and she shrugged it off at first, saying it was probably normal. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The hole looked odd in a way that didn't feel right. The next morning, while the family was still waking up, I decided to investigate more carefully. I grabbed a ladder from the garage and climbed up slowly, trying not to make noise. The hole was just big enough to fit the tip of a small tool or a camera lens. I reached up and gently touched the detector, feeling the plastic casing. It was loose, not firmly attached to the ceiling like it should have been. With a little more pressure, the whole detector popped off easily, revealing the wires and battery inside. I held it in my hands and turned it over. There, hidden in the back casing, was a tiny lens, a camera. It was almost invisible, but the small glass lens was unmistakable. My heart started pounding. I took the detector to the kitchen table and showed my wife. She was stunned. The thought that someone had installed a hidden camera in the smoke detector, a place meant to protect us, felt like a terrible violation. Our privacy, our safety, everything felt shattered in an instant. I didn't want to panic, but the more I thought about it, the worse it got. Who had put the camera there? When? Were they watching us? How long had it been recording? I couldn't imagine someone doing this in a family's vacation home. The kids were here. We were supposed to feel safe. I carefully inspected the rest of the house. I checked every room, every corner, every device. I found nothing else unusual, but that didn't make me feel any better. The idea that a stranger could watch us without us knowing was terrifying. The day passed in a blur. I wanted to tell the Airbnb host immediately, but I also wanted to gather more proof first. I looked closely at the camera, trying to see if it had a memory card or any way to record. The lens was tiny, but it was attached to a small black box inside the detector with a little red light that blinked faintly when I moved it. I thought about what to do next. Calling the police felt extreme. Was this illegal? I wasn't sure, but it felt wrong. I looked up online about hidden cameras and rentals and found dozens of stories where travelers discovered cameras placed in bedrooms, bathrooms, and living areas. It was a growing problem, and many hosts used them for security, but few guests knew about them. I took photos of the camera and the smoke detector and contacted Airbnb support through the app. I explained what I found and asked for help. They responded quickly, telling me they would investigate and suspend the host account temporarily. But that didn't make me feel any safer. For the rest of the trip, I stayed on edge. Every time I looked at the ceiling, my skin crawled. I couldn't sleep properly, thinking about the possibility that we had been watched. The kids noticed I was distracted, and I tried to act normal, but inside, I felt angry and vulnerable. The house itself was nice, but we barely used the bedrooms. We spent most of our time outside or at the beach, avoiding being inside when we didn't have to be. The feeling of being watched had ruined the vacation atmosphere. When we returned home, I kept thinking about what happened. I shared the story on social media and joined forums where people talked about hidden cameras and rentals. It was shocking how common it was and how many people were affected without knowing. The discovery taught me an important lesson. Always check your rental carefully, even if it looks perfect. Hidden cameras can be small, cleverly disguised, and easy to miss. They violate your privacy and trust. It made me realize how much we take our safety for granted, especially when we're away from home. Now, whenever I travel, I carry a small camera detector device. It's a simple tool that helps find hidden lenses by reflecting light off camera glass. It gives me peace of mind knowing I can check before settling in. The experience was scary, but also empowering. It reminded me to be aware and protect my family. Privacy is something we shouldn't compromise, especially when we're supposed to be relaxing and safe. Though the vacation didn't end the way we hoped, I'm grateful we found the camera ourselves and not later, after damage was done. It was a hard lesson, but one I needed to learn. And now, I can share this story to help others stay safe too. I remember that night in London like it was yesterday, even though it's been months now. I was staying with my boyfriend, Taylor, in a flat we had rented through Airbnb. We were there for a short trip, me for some influencer events and Taylor for a few tennis commitments. The flat looked nice online, and it was in a quiet neighborhood not far from the city center. At first, everything seemed fine. The street was peaceful, the building clean, and the neighborhood felt safe enough for a couple of young people like us. We spent the evening out, grabbing a late dinner and walking around the area. It was a cool night, the kind of London weather that makes you want to wear a light jacket, but still feel the chill creeping in. When we got back to the flat, it was about midnight. The door was old, a bit creaky, but the lock worked fine, and there was a safety chain we locked as soon as we got inside. I remember feeling relaxed once we settled in. We had unpacked, and Taylor was scrolling through his phone while I was laying down, tired from the day's events. The flat wasn't large, but it was cozy. It had a small living room with a couch facing a modest TV, a tiny kitchen area with just enough counter space to make tea, and a bedroom with a big window that overlooked a quiet street. The walls were thin, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic far below. It was the kind of place that felt safe enough for a city, but nothing special. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the wind, or maybe a car door closing outside. But then it came again, a subtle but definite sound of something brushing against the front door, like a hand or a tool moving along the wood or metal. I froze. My heart started pounding. I nudged Taylor gently, but he was already half awake, sensing something was off. We both listened in silence. The sound came again, sharper this time, a soft scraping, a noise that didn't belong in our quiet flat. My mind started racing. Was someone trying to break in? Could it be a mistake? Maybe a delivery or a neighbor. But it didn't feel right. The timing was wrong, and the noise wasn't like a normal knock or a friendly tap. Taylor quietly got up and moved to the door. He peeked through the peephole, but it was too dark outside to see anything clearly. Then he checked the safety chain. That's when my stomach dropped. The chain was no longer hooked on the door. It was hanging loose on the wall, like someone had slipped it off while we were asleep. We had locked it ourselves before going to bed. A cold wave of fear hit me. Whoever was out there wasn't just knocking. They were trying to get in. And they had managed to remove the chain without making any noise loud enough to wake us immediately. We were vulnerable. Taylor motioned for me to stay back while he quietly grabbed the small baseball bat we had in the closet, something we kept for emergencies, mostly just for peace of mind. He stood by the door, ready to act if needed. I moved to the far corner of the room, clutching my phone, fingers trembling. I was too scared to make a call right away, afraid that any noise might alert whoever was outside. The sound came again, this time more aggressive. It was the noise of someone trying to turn the handle, slowly, gently at first, then with more force. I could hear the metal lock clicking under pressure. My breath caught. The door wasn't budging. We had locked it well. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. It felt like hours. The intruder was persistent. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in quietly, but determined. I wondered if they had been watching the place, waiting for the right moment. The thought sent chills down my spine. Taylor whispered, telling me to get ready to run if the door gave way. I nodded, though my hand was shaking too badly to hold the phone steady. I tried calling the police, but was too scared to speak. The line rang and rang, and I hoped someone would answer soon. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. The silence was even worse than the noise. My ears strained, waiting for any sound, but there was nothing. It felt like the flat was holding its breath with us. We stayed still, frozen, until we heard footsteps retreating down the hallway outside. The relief was immediate, but didn't last long. We knew the danger hadn't passed. The person could come back anytime. I locked the door again, double-checked the chain, and then, with Taylor's help, we barricaded the door with a couch and a heavy table. Still, the fear lingered. We didn't sleep that night. Instead, we sat in the dark, holding each other and waiting for morning. I kept refreshing my phone, watching the police's estimated arrival time. Finally, after what felt like forever, there was a knock at the door. It was the police. They took our statements, checked the door and locks, and assured us they would patrol the neighborhood more frequently. They said attempts like this sometimes happen, even in areas that seem safe. They told us to contact Airbnb and report the incident. I shared everything on my Instagram story the next day. The fear, the helplessness, the clear signs that safety chains and locks aren't always enough. I wanted to warn others, to make people think twice before trusting a place, just because it looks nice online. We ended up leaving the flat early, moving to a hotel with better security. The experience changed how I see travel. No longer was it just about the fun or the views, it was about safety first. From that night on, I've been more careful, more aware, and I always check doors and locks myself before settling in anywhere. Looking back, I'm grateful we weren't harmed. It could have been so much worse if that person had gotten in. It was a harsh reminder that no matter how safe a place seems, danger can be close. It taught me to trust my instincts and never take security for granted. That night stayed with me. It's not a story about ghosts or mysterious forces. It's about real fear, real danger, and the importance of staying alert. It made me stronger and more cautious, but it also made me speak out. Because if sharing what happened keeps just one person safer, then it's worth reliving that terrifying night all over again. It started as a dream trip, the kind you plan for months. I found a place online, a massive modern Airbnb tucked away in the woods of Northern California. The photos showed a sleek, glass-walled house perched on a hillside, surrounded by towering pines. Inside, there were high ceilings, polished wooden floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows with views stretching out to the distant mountains. It looked perfect, like a place to disappear from the world for a while. The host was friendly enough in the messages, though I remember thinking the booking request felt a bit odd, but I shrugged it off. I was supposed to stay there from late March to early April 2022. 7 days. A week in paradise, just me and my backpack, a few books, and plans to hike nearby trails. The money was a lot, but I'd saved for it, thinking it was worth every penny. When I arrived, the house was exactly as the pictures showed. Modern, clean, almost too perfect. The quiet was intense, the kind of silence you don't get in the city. The only sounds were the occasional wind rustling through the trees and the distant call of a hawk. I unpacked slowly, feeling the tension of everyday life start to peel away. The first few days were amazing. I woke up early, brewed coffee on the stainless steel stove, and watched the sunrise paint the sky pink and orange through the giant windows. I spent afternoons hiking the nearby trails, sometimes wandering alone for hours. At night, I cooked simple meals, read by the fire pit outside, and listened to the forest breathe. The isolation was peaceful, almost therapeutic. But after a week, things started to feel strange. The first time, it was subtle, a door left slightly open when I was sure I closed it. I blamed the wind. Then I noticed that some of my belongings had been moved. Not stolen, just shifted. My shoes weren't where I left them. The kitchen table had crumbs that weren't mine. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired or paranoid, but the feeling grew. I checked every lock every night, double-checked the windows. The house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. I tried to reach out to the host. The messages I sent got no reply. The phone number was disconnected. That's when I started to realize something was off. Maybe the booking had been canceled, or maybe the host wasn't who they said they were. I looked up the property online again, and that's when I found the news. It wasn't just me staying there. There was a woman who had booked the place before me, supposedly until April 2022, but she had never left. The story said she had stayed for over a year and a half, accumulating more than $60,000 in unpaid rent. The homeowner had ignored a sketchy booking request, and now the woman was basically squatting in this multi-million-dollar house, refusing to leave. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was she still there? Was someone else inside the house with me? I hadn't seen her, but the signs were there. Things moved, sounds at night, faint smells that weren't mine. I started keeping a journal, writing down every strange thing I noticed. At night, I would sit by the window with a flashlight, scanning the dark woods. I'd heard the stories before: squatters, people who latch onto places and won't let go, but I never imagined living it. The tension built slowly. I stopped hiking as much, afraid of what might be waiting in the forest. I locked myself inside, checked every window and door repeatedly. The silence of the house was now oppressive, like the walls were closing in. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from the hallway outside my bedroom. I held my breath, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped at the door. I didn't move. The door handle turned slowly, but the door didn't open. I sat frozen, eyes wide in the dark. The footsteps retreated down the hall. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. After that, I knew I had to get out. I packed everything quietly at dawn and left without looking back. The news story said the woman was finally forced out by the courts months later, but I never went back to check. I learned that sometimes the real horror isn't ghosts or monsters, but the fear of sharing your space with someone who refuses to leave, someone who makes a place you thought was safe feel like a trap. I want to share something that happened to me one summer, something that still sticks with me years later. It's a story about a camping trip that should have been a simple break from the city, but turned into a chilling reminder of how danger can lurk in the quietest places. I'll tell it as it happened, plain and real, without any tricks or ghosts, just a raw, true experience. I've been planning a solo camping trip outside Luton, in a patch of countryside I found on a local hiking forum. The place was supposed to be peaceful, a few miles from town, near some woods and a small stream. Nothing fancy, just a quiet spot where I could set up my tent and spend a couple of nights away from the noise. I wanted to clear my head and get some fresh air. It wasn't some deep wilderness, more like a green belt on the edge of suburbia, but it felt like the right kind of escape. The day I arrived, it was early afternoon and warm, the sun high but softened by scattered clouds. I carried my backpack and gear through a narrow dirt path flanked by tall grass and wildflowers. The air smelled clean and faintly of damp earth. As I walked, I noticed how still everything was. No birdsong, no rustling in the bushes, just silence. That made me feel a little uneasy, but I told myself it was normal. Sometimes nature gets quiet, especially in the heat of the day. I found a flat clearing near the edge of the trees and set up my tent. It was small, a basic two-person model, but I had it mostly to store my gear and keep me dry if it rained. After pitching it, I took a moment to look around. The woods behind me were thick, dense with oak and ash trees, their trunks dark and rough. The stream I'd read about was just a few hundred feet away, its water clear and slow-moving. I could hear the faint splash of water over stones. A perfect spot. That evening, after cooking a simple meal over a small camping stove, I sat by the edge of the clearing and watched the sun go down. The sky turned a deep orange and purple, the trees casting long shadows across the grass. I felt relaxed for the first time in weeks, but as darkness settled, a strange feeling crept over me. It wasn't fear exactly, more like a heavy weight pressing on my chest, like something unseen was watching me. I shook it off and went to bed early. The tent zipped up tight. I lay on my sleeping mat and listened to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped, the stream murmured, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once or twice. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke in the middle of the night to a faint noise, something outside the tent. It was subtle, like footsteps crunching on dry leaves. At first, I thought it might be an animal. Foxes and badgers were common around here, but the sound was too steady, too careful. Someone was walking slowly around my camp. I froze, heart pounding, trying not to make a sound. I didn't unzip the tent. I just lay there, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard a soft shuffle near the edge of the clearing, close enough that I could almost see a shadow against the trees if I opened my eyes. My mind raced. Who would be out here at this hour? Was it a hunter? Someone lost? Or worse, someone dangerous? I stayed still for what felt like an eternity, the sounds fading away slowly. When I finally felt it was safe, I quietly unzipped the tent just a crack and peeked outside. The clearing was empty, moonlight casting pale silver over the grass. No sign of anyone. I packed a small knife into my hand and sat up, eyes scanning the dark woods, waiting. Nothing moved. I forced myself to calm down, telling myself it was probably just a person passing by or some animal. I even thought about the news stories I'd read before this trip about crimes and murders in and around Luton. Those things usually happened in the city. I reminded myself, not here in the countryside. But that night, sleep didn't come back. I stayed awake, listening for any more sounds. When dawn finally broke, a gray light seeping through the trees, I got up and started packing. The unease wouldn't leave me. On the way back to town, I stopped by a small cafe and got talking to the owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a steady voice. She knew the area well and listened carefully when I mentioned the noises I'd heard. Then she told me something that chilled me deeply. She said there had been a recent tragedy nearby. A man had murdered his grandfather in a house just a few miles from where I'd camped. After the crime, the killer fled and stayed in an Airbnb not far from that area to hide out. The police found him eventually and arrested him, but the case had shocked the community. What was worse, the Airbnb where he hid out had no real background checks on guests. The owner had just rented the place without knowing anything about the man's history. That explained the silence I'd felt, the strange stillness at the campsite. The killer was close, hiding somewhere in those woods or in the nearby homes, trying to stay under the radar. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I'd unknowingly camped near a crime scene and had been within reach of a man who had just committed murder. For days after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept replaying that night over and over, wondering if those footsteps outside my tent had been his. Maybe he was out there, moving quietly through the trees, waiting for a chance to disappear again. The whole experience left me shaken in a way I'd never felt before. The case also made me think hard about how places like Airbnbs, those rented homes and cabins we trust for a safe place to stay, can sometimes be hiding spots for dangerous people. Without proper checks, it's easy for someone with a violent past to slip through the cracks. That thought made me more cautious in the years after, always double-checking where I stayed, who rented the place, and whether there was a real way to know who was on the other side of the door. That camping trip should have been a quiet, simple break in nature. Instead, it became a harsh lesson on how real danger can hide in the most unexpected places, just beneath the surface of normal life. It made me realize that even the quietest woods can hold secrets, and sometimes the scariest stories don't come from ghost tales or legends, but from the dark reality of what people are capable of. Since then, I never camp without making sure I know the area well. I avoid places where I can't be sure who might be nearby. That night, near Luton, taught me that safety isn't just about having a tent or a map. It's about understanding the world around you and respecting how close danger can be, even when you think you're alone in the wilderness. We had planned the hike for a few weeks. There were 6 of us, 3 guys, 3 women, all of us in our late 20s or early 30s. We knew each other through mutual friends, a mix of coworkers, and people who had met on previous hikes. We weren't all close, but we had enough shared experiences that it didn't feel awkward. The plan was simple: a 3-day, 2-night out and back hike in Washington State, deep in the woods where cell service dropped off about 30 minutes into the drive. The trail we picked wasn't a well-known one. It wasn't on any big tourist sites, and that was part of the appeal. One of the guys, Matt, had been there before. He'd hiked it the year before and talked it up. Said it had a couple of good spots to camp, a lake on the second day, and views of the hills that stretched out for miles. We trusted him. We packed light, but smart. Backpacking gear, tents, water filters, food, headlamps, and the usual safety stuff. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep us dry and fed. The first day went fine. We hit the trail mid-morning, legs fresh, talking about life and work and random stuff. The forest was beautiful. Dense firs and moss-covered ground, everything shaded and cool. The air had that smell you only get out there, damp earth, pine sap, and something old and still. We made camp before sunset at a clearing near stream, built a small fire, cooked some freeze-dried meals, and joked around until everyone crawled into their tents. The second day was tougher. The trail narrowed, the incline kicked in, and we didn't talk as much, just focused on getting through the miles. We reached the lake around late afternoon, tucked between two ridges. It was colder there. The wind came off the water and carried a chill through camp. But the place was perfect, quiet, no signs of other people, not even trash, just us and the sound of birds and distant wind through the trees. That night, we set up a better fire, bigger. Someone brought a flask and passed it around. We cooked again, ate slowly, and talked about the stars, the silence, and how different it all felt compared to the city. Around 10, one by one, everyone started peeling off to their tents. I stayed up a bit longer, staring at the fire and letting my eyes adjust to the dark. I like how the shadows danced in the trees. The woods can feel both huge and small at night, like you're trapped in something endless. Around midnight, I felt the urge to take a piss. I didn't want to go right outside the tents, so I grabbed my headlamp, didn't turn it on, and walked into the woods. Just far enough for some privacy. Maybe 150, 200 yards. It wasn't a straight line. I kind of curved around, stepping over roots, avoiding the crunch of dry branches. I knew I'd be able to follow my tracks back. I wasn't worried. The forest was dark, but not pitch black. There was a half moon above the trees, and I could make out shapes well enough. I found a good spot, did my business, zipped up, and turned to go back. That's when I realized I couldn't see the fire anymore. I looked in the direction I thought camp was, but nothing stood out. No orange glow, no flicker between the trees, no voices. I waited for a second, thinking maybe I'd gone farther than I thought. I turned on my headlamp and swept it around. Tree trunks, underbrush, a few broken branches from where I'd walked through, but nothing that told me where I was. Then I heard it. Footsteps. At first, it sounded like one person. Not running, just walking, moving lightly over the forest floor. Leaves and twigs crunching just enough to hear, but not enough to give away a direction. I stood still. I figured maybe someone else had woken up and wandered out like I did. Maybe they saw my light. Maybe it was Matt or Becca or one of the others. I turned off my headlamp to see if I could spot their light. Nothing. Then the footsteps stopped. I stood there listening. I didn't call out. Something about the silence that followed made me want to stay quiet. I took a slow step backward, feeling with my heel before putting weight down, trying not to snap a twig or rustle leaves. I turned a little, trying to orient myself, but everything looked the same. Trees, brush, dirt. No landmarks. I figured I'd wait a few seconds and try to listen for camp. That's when I heard my name. At first, it was soft, like someone trying not to be too loud. Just a little louder than a whisper. Then again, a little closer. It was my name, but not quite right. The tone was off. The rhythm was wrong. It was like when you hear your own voice on a recording, familiar but hollow. It didn't sound like anyone specific, just off. It came from the direction I'd heard the footsteps. Then I heard it again from a different direction. Same voice, same wrong tone, like someone trying to sound like they knew me. I crouched down, just dropped low and turned off my light. I didn't move. My heart was pounding. Every part of my body told me not to answer, not to move, just stay still. Then I saw it. Something moved low to the ground, between two trees. It wasn't walking upright. It was crawling fast, too fast, like someone on their hands and knees who didn't care about making noise. I couldn't see its shape clearly, just the motion, a blur between trunks, then stillness. Then again, moving sideways. I don't know how far away it was. Maybe 30, 40 feet, but it was quiet when it moved, like it was used to it. I kept still. My breathing was short. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where to go. I couldn't see camp. I didn't know if whatever I saw had seen me. So I stayed crouched, one hand on the ground, the other on my headlamp with my thumb hovering over the switch. It stayed quiet after that. Minutes passed, maybe longer. I lost track of time. My legs started cramping. My back ached, but I didn't move. I listened to every sound, every shift in the wind, every creak of a tree, and every once in a while, I'd hear it, my name, from somewhere nearby. Always that same voice. Not loud, not urgent, just saying it like it was trying to lure me out. At some point, I stopped hearing anything. The woods got cold. My fingers were numb. My knees throbbed. I wanted to cry, but held it in. I didn't even blink for long stretches. I just stayed low, staring at the same patch of ground. When the sky finally started to lighten, it was barely noticeable. Just a faint blue above the trees. The moon had set. I slowly stood up, legs shaking, and looked around. No movement, no sounds. The thing, or whatever it was gone. I turned my headlamp on and started retracing my steps. Not fast, just careful, looking for broken twigs, disturbed moss, marks in the dirt. I made a curved path, and I had to double back a few times when I lost it. I didn't call out. I didn't want to risk it still being out there. Eventually, I saw the edge of camp. The fire was out. The tents were still zipped up. Everything looked normal. I walked in like nothing had happened, got into my tent, and zipped it up. My hands were trembling so bad, I had to steady them against my knees. I lay down and closed my eyes. I didn't sleep, but I kept still. When everyone started waking up, I unzipped my tent and joined them like nothing was off. They were making coffee, packing up gear, talking about the hike back. No one mentioned anything strange. No one said they'd heard me leave. I asked Matt if he'd been up during the night. He said no. Same with the others. I didn't bring it up. We hiked out that day. The trail felt different. I kept glancing into the woods. Every shadow felt closer than it should be. Every snapping branch made me jump. I kept checking behind us. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't say anything. When we got back to our cars, we all said goodbye and promised to keep in touch. I drove home in silence. Didn't turn on the radio. Didn't stop until I got back to my apartment. I took a hot shower, lay on the couch, and stared at the ceiling until it got dark again. I didn't sleep that night either. In the weeks after, I tried to make sense of it. Thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd wandered farther than I thought. Panicked when I couldn't find my way back, and hallucinated the voice. But that thing crawling through the trees, that wasn't in my head. That wasn't a dream. I've seen people crawl before. That wasn't normal movement. That was something else. I've gone hiking since then, but never alone. And never off trail. I keep thinking about how no one saw me leave. No one noticed I was gone all night. They thought I was in my tent, which means if I hadn't made it back, maybe they wouldn't have noticed at all. This night was probably one of the most terrifying and exhilarating experiences in my life. It all started with what seemed like a simple, fun outing, but it quickly turned into something I never expected, and something I still can't fully shake from my mind. I'm from a place where small towns are scattered between big cities, and the kind of trouble that comes with gang violence was no joke when I was in high school. It was so bad that the National Guard had to come in to help the local police keep the peace. That kind of atmosphere hangs heavy over everything. Even just going out to have fun meant dealing with sketchy areas where the usual hangouts, movie theaters, bowling alleys, places like that, were always in rough neighborhoods. It was like you had to accept a certain amount of risk just to get some entertainment. The Rocky reboot had just come out, and me and my two friends, John and Jack, decided to catch it at the local theater. John was my best friend, the silent, stoic type, built like a linebacker and the captain of our high school football team. Always calm, never one to panic. Jack was the opposite. Funny, cocky, always pushing people's buttons, but mostly harmless. He was into baseball and was a semi-pro pitcher now, though that wouldn't come into play until later. We got to the theater, watched the movie, and when it ended, we started walking back to our cars. Right away, we noticed this one car parked not far from ours. It was completely trashed. Every window was broken or cracked, dents all over the hood and doors, dirt shoveled into the driver's seat like some kind of sick joke. On top of it, someone had tipped over a trash can onto the roof and left a giant 7 to 11 big gulp cup standing upright right in the middle of the mess. The tires were all slashed. Whoever owned this car had pissed off someone real bad. Jack picked up a rock off the ground and looked at that cup. "Think I can hit that cup off?" he said with a grin, holding the rock like a pitcher about to throw a fastball. Me and John both told him no way. It was way too far, like 90 feet, and probably impossible. Jack, being Jack, didn't listen. He took the rock and launched it toward the car. We were about to head back to my car when we heard it. "Wyo, what the F-U-C-K?" Shouting and yelling coming from near the theater entrance. We turned around and saw a man storming toward the car. His face was red with anger. We had no idea who he was, but he was clearly the owner of that wrecked car, and he wasn't alone. We suddenly realized the trouble we were in. We had no proof we didn't cause the damage. The neighborhood was known for the shoot first, ask questions later kind of justice. It felt like a trap closing in. Without thinking, I jumped into the driver's seat and started the car. John got on the passenger side, and Jack climbed in the back. Jack was laughing, thinking the guy couldn't catch us because his car was trashed. But none of US had counted on him not being alone. We pulled out of the lot, and 5 minutes down the road, I saw it. High beams flashing in my rearview mirror. Someone was behind us, and fast. I took the next turn down a side street next to a gas station, hoping to lose them. But they weren't having it. Their car shot through the gas station and pulled out in front of me, blocking my path. They stopped, put their car in park, and the doors swung open. My heart dropped. I was sure this was it. We were about to get shot, or worse. My friends were yelling, but their voices were drowned out by the pounding of adrenaline in my ears. John kept saying they could handle it, that me and him could each fight 2 guys and Jack could help. I want to believe that, but what if they had guns? Knives? We had nothing but a watch, an ice scraper, and some half-melted milk duds from the movie. Then I caught a glimpse of something silver in the driver's hand. I couldn't tell what it was, but it wasn't something I wanted near me. My body went into autopilot. I slammed my foot on the gas and swerved around the first car. I cut back through the gas station, blew a red light, and hit the main road, trying to outrun them. They were behind us again. Jack was frantically calling friends, hoping to find a party where we could pull over and have some backup. John, cool as ever, started taking off his jewelry and stashing keys, wallet, and phone in my glove box. He told me to just pull over, saying we got this. I looked at him like he was crazy. The only thing I saw was danger. We hit a stretch of road with traffic, and the 2 cars chasing us got stuck behind a red light. I took advantage, turning onto a bigger road, pushing the gas harder, trying to shake them off. I floored it, hitting 95 miles per hour for 3 straight minutes. Jack finally shouted from the back seat that he couldn't see them anymore. I slowed down, feeling a small flicker of hope that we had lost them. But the next exit was a mile away, and suddenly 2 cars appeared behind us again, speeding fast, closing the distance. They were catching up. Jack was panicking now. The tension in the car was thick. In that moment, I did something dumb, but maybe smart. I acted like nothing was wrong, like we weren't being chased. I kept my speed steady, didn't look nervous, tried to pretend everything was normal. The first car passed me, then slowed down right before the exit, clearly realizing it was us. That gave me the chance to swerve suddenly, take the exit, and leave that car stuck behind, confused and caught off guard. Now, it was just the 1 car behind us. I kept pushing the speed high enough that the first car couldn't catch up. Jack, now calm but serious, was ready to pull over and face this group head on. But I wasn't convinced. What if they had weapons after all? We were deep into my home territory now, driving through back roads with barely any streetlights. The only thing keeping us going was the thought that these guys were out of their element here. We could make out 2 or 3 silhouettes in the car behind us, so maybe it was just a few guys. We thought about showing some guts and taking them on if we had to. Finally, I saw an open field next to the road. I decided to pull off. After 15 minutes of being chased, it felt like they might expect an ambush. I wanted to catch them off guard instead. We stopped the car, hearts pounding, breath heavy. John got out first, followed by Jack, and I stayed back, watching the car with my pulse racing. Jack started waving his arms like a maniac, pointing at the empty cornfield beside us. I was confused, yelling at him to stop, but then I realized what he was doing. He was pretending like we had backup waiting in the field, like there was a whole team of people ready to jump out and fight. It was ridiculous, and it shouldn't have worked, but it did. The gangbangers in the car glanced around, probably trying to figure out what was going on. Maybe they thought they were walking into a trap. Whatever it was, they didn't want any part of it. They put their car in reverse and peeled out of there like their lives depended on it. We all stood there, stunned for a moment, hearts still hammering, trying to believe what had just happened. Jack, my asshole friend, had saved us by pretending there was an ambush waiting for them in an empty field. We got back in the car, hands still shaking, and drove home in silence. The adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a deep exhaustion and relief, so intense it almost felt unreal. That night, I realized how close we came to something terrible. How quickly a night out could turn into a nightmare. And how sometimes the dumbest ideas, like waving your arms at nothing, can be the smartest moves to save your life. My mom lives in a nice neighborhood. It's the kind of place where the streets are quiet, the lawns are trimmed, and people wave to each other when they pass by. It's not a gated community or anything fancy, but it's peaceful. She's lived there for years, and I've spent a good amount of time visiting her. Across the street from her house lives a family with a 12-year-old boy who has autism. He's unusually tall and skinny for his age. He's kind of lanky, with long arms and legs that make him look older than he really is. Whenever I came over to my mom's, I would see him outside playing in the yard. Usually he was tossing a ball around or running back and forth under the watchful eye of his caregiver. The caregiver was always nearby, a woman who kept a calm, steady presence while watching over him. I never thought much of it. He seemed like a quiet kid who just liked his routines. He didn't talk much, at least not with anyone outside his family or caregivers. When I saw him, he mostly kept to himself, absorbed in his own world. Sometimes he'd look over at me when I walked by, but his eyes didn't really connect, like he was staring right through me. One afternoon, about a year ago, I went to visit my mom. I parked my car in her driveway and stepped out. It was early fall, the air had started to cool down, and the leaves were beginning to turn a soft gold and rust color. The sun was still warm, but the wind had picked up that day, swirling leaves around the street and tugging at the branches of the tall oaks lining the road. As I locked the car and headed toward the house, I noticed a boy across the street. He was standing near his front yard, looking down at the bottom of my car. At first, I thought maybe he was just curious or maybe even bored and watching something move under the vehicle. As I got closer, I realized he was pacing slowly around the car, moving his head from one side to the other, eyes fixed on the spot beneath it. Then I saw what he was doing. His ball had rolled under the car, and he was trying to figure out how to get it. I knelt down and reached under the bumper, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips, and grabbed the ball. It was a simple rubber ball, about the size of a grapefruit, scuffed and worn from use. I stood up and held it out to him. When I gave the ball back, something about the way he looked at me stopped me. His head tilted to the side slowly, like he was trying to understand something, but his mouth hung open slightly, and his eyes were empty. They weren't the kind of vacant that comes from just staring off into space. These were hollow, like he wasn't really there. I gave him a small, awkward smile, hoping to reassure him, but he didn't smile back. He just stared at me, holding the ball close to his chest with his long, thin arms, like it was something precious or fragile. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, even though it was a warm afternoon. There was something off about the way he looked at me, something that didn't make sense. I decided not to say anything else and just turned to walk back into my mom's house. But before I closed the door behind me, I glanced back over my shoulder. The boy was still sitting on the curb across the street, staring right at me, as if frozen in place. That night, I told my then girlfriend what had happened. She was visiting me and listened quietly as I recounted the strange encounter. She shrugged it off with a soft smile and said, he probably just wanted to say thank you, but was confused and didn't know how." Her explanation made sense. Kids with autism often have trouble expressing themselves, and maybe that was all it was, just a moment of confusion. Despite that, I decided to stay the night at my mom's house. It was autumn, and the Santa Ana winds were blowing hard that evening. I remember the sound of the wind rattling the windows and whistling through the trees outside. The air smelled dry and sharp. I was sitting in my old room upstairs, scrolling through my phone and trying to ignore the eerie creaks and groans the house made as the wind pushed against it. Around 2 a.m., I heard a trash can roll across the street, banging into a mailbox with a loud clatter. I was just about to put my phone down when I heard the house alarm beep. The sound was sudden and jarring in the quiet night. Beep, beep. The panel on the wall flashed red, and a voice announced, "Front door open." I froze for a second. The front door was known for being tricky. The strong wind sometimes pushed it open if it wasn't shut tight enough. Usually my mom made sure to double check it before bed, but sometimes, especially when the wind blew hard, it would pop open just a crack. I got up from my chair and headed toward the door, half expecting to see the wind blowing the curtains or maybe the door swinging in the draft. The hallway outside my room was dark, and I reached out, fumbling for the light switch on the wall. When I flipped it on, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Standing there at the top of the staircase was the boy from across the street. He was motionless, just standing, staring at me. The same blank, dead look in his eyes was there. His head tilted loosely to one side, and his mouth was open again, slack and expressionless. The long limbs that made him look so tall and lanky stretched out in the dim light. His skin looked pale, almost ghostly under the hallway light, but there was no explanation for how he got into the house. The front door was supposed to be locked, but there he was. I swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum. For a moment, I just stared back, trying to figure out what to do. Then, carefully, I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were thin and long, like spider legs, and ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver straight up my arm. He didn't resist. His hand felt limp in mine, almost as if he were a doll or a puppet. I didn't say anything. I just let him down the stairs and out the front door. The wind was still howling, tearing at the leaves and shaking the branches of the trees. The boy didn't look away from me as I walked him across the street. When we got to his house, the front door was wide open. No lights on inside, just dark shadows behind the glass panes. I showed him inside, making sure he went in safely. He didn't turn around or speak. He just shuffled inside like someone who had wandered off and didn't know how to get home. I locked the door behind him and hurried back to my mom's house. Once inside, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. I turned on every light in the house, even the ones I usually left off. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of mistake, that maybe the caregiver had left the door open by accident and the boy had slipped out without anyone noticing. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, listening to the wind howl around the house and imagining that vacant stare. It stuck with me like a shadow, creeping into the corners of my mind. The next morning, I asked my mom if she or anyone else in the neighborhood had noticed anything strange. She said no one had reported anything unusual, and the caregiver had called to say everything was fine. But I knew better. There was something in those empty eyes, something cold and wrong that I couldn't explain. It wasn't fear of the boy himself. He didn't seem capable of doing anything malicious, but it was the way he moved, the way he looked at me like he wasn't really there, like he was something else entirely. I never saw him inside the house again, and after that night, I made sure to lock every door and window extra tight whenever I stayed over. The boy still played outside sometimes, his ball bouncing against the pavement, but I never got close again. I kept my distance, watching from the window, try to understand what I had seen. I've thought about that night often. What happened wasn't supernatural or part of some ghost story. It was something real and unsettling, an unexpected glimpse into a moment where normal boundaries broke down and something unknown stepped through the cracks. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't monsters or spirits. Sometimes, it's just the way a person can look at you and make you feel completely alone, like you're the only one who's really there. That boy, with his tall, lanky frame and empty eyes, stayed in my mind long after the wind stopped howling and the leaves settled on the ground. I grew up in a small town right in the heart of Amish country, Ohio. It's the kind of place where nothing much ever happens, and most days you could count the number of cars passing by on the main road on one hand. For most of us in high school, that boredom was the worst enemy. There was nothing to do after school, nothing to see, and no cool hangout spots like you'd expect in bigger towns or cities. So, naturally, we had to get creative. A few friends and I would spend hours searching for weird, off-the-path places to explore. Old barns, forgotten trails, and once this abandoned mansion a buddy of mine had heard about. The stories around town said it had been empty for decades, a real relic from the turn of the century, sitting deep in the woods, far from any road or neighbor. That night, After watching the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre at one of our houses, we all got the dumb idea to go check out that house. The movie had us on edge, and maybe we wanted to test ourselves or just scare each other more. There were 10 of us in total, a mixed group of guys and girls from our class. Everyone brought flashlights, and I decided to bring my old shotgun from the farm, just for laughs. I didn't expect to use it, of course, but I thought having it might help with the mood and maybe keep anything nasty from showing up. We parked the cars on a gravel road that ended in a small clearing right next to a slow-moving river. From there, we had to cross the river on some uneven logs. Nothing official, just the way locals have been getting across for years. Once on the other side, it was a long walk through dense woods, probably about a mile before the trees started to thin and the mansion came into view. The walk was mostly quiet, just the crunch of dead leaves and broken twigs under our feet. Everyone was joking a little, but you could tell we were all tense. The movie was still fresh in our minds, and the woods at night made everything feel 10 times worse. The air smelled like wet earth and rotting leaves, and somewhere far off, an owl hooted softly. When the house finally came into view, it was bigger than I expected. The mansion looked like it belonged to some old wealthy family. 2 stories, big columns on the porch, and lots of broken windows with shattered glass scattered on the ground. There was no driveway or path leading up to it. Grass and weeds had grown wild all around, and the porch was sagging under the weight of years of neglect. The roof was partially caved in, and the second floor had actually collapsed down onto the first floor in the middle of the house. Because of that, nobody could get inside safely, so we just circled around the outside. The house creaked with every wind gust, and the moonlight made the broken glass and peeling paint shimmer eerily. As we made our way around, one of my buddies stopped suddenly. He was staring at one of the side walls, and when we all got closer, we could see strange writing scrawled in what looked like black paint or maybe something darker, stained and smeared across the wood siding. The words were mostly faded and hard to read, but the last part was chilling. 10 sets of initials carved or scratched deeply into the wall. We each recognized the initials. It was all of us, every person in our group. The girls got quiet and started glancing nervously at each other. We were all already uneasy from the movie and the atmosphere, and seeing our initials there felt like a warning. No one wanted to stick around, but before we could leave, one of the guys on the other side of the house shouted, "Hey, I found something." Everyone rushed over, flashlights bobbing through the dark. He was looking into a broken window on the first floor. Inside, hanging from the ceiling by a thick, frayed rope, was a white wedding dress. It was dirty and stained, but the fabric still held that strange, ghostly glow under the flashlight beams. Across the front of the dress was a huge, dark red stain, like someone had spilled blood on it or worse. We all backed away, silent except for the crunch of our footsteps on the dry grass. Then I felt the ground shift under my feet. Before I could react, a loud crash shattered the night. The earth gave way beneath 6 of us, and we dropped about 10 feet down through a hole that had been hidden by brush and leaves. We landed in a dark, dirt-walled room with the smell of rust and decay thick in the air. It wasn't a basement like you'd find in a normal house. It was just dirt and rock walls. The floor was hard-packed dirt, uneven and dusty. I shone my flashlight around, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The room was set up like something straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie we just watched. There were old ropes hanging from hooks in the ceiling, rusty chains dangling from the walls, and tables covered with heavy tools, saws, hooks, and knives, all stained dark with what looked like old blood. Some of the tools were still shiny with rust, but you could tell they'd been used for something nasty. We didn't have time to take it all in. One of my friends screamed and started yelling for us to get the hell out. We scrambled to the hole, and the 2 guys who hadn't fallen down reached in to pull us out. Everyone got out except for one guy who twisted his ankle badly when we fell. The 2 strongest guys carried him through the woods back to the car. The rest of us stuck together in a tight group, walking as fast as we could back through the dark trees. I stayed at the back, walking backwards the whole time with my shotgun ready and safety off. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Every sound, the The rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant animal calls felt like something dangerous stalking us. We didn't speak much, only quick whispers when someone tripped or slowed down. The weight of what we'd found made the silence heavier than any noise. The next day, a few of us went back to the gravel road where we'd parked. When we got there, 3 police cars were pulled up on the side of the road. Lights off, but clearly there for something serious. We pulled over and asked what was going on. It turned out someone had heard noises in the woods the night before and called the cops. When they searched the mansion, they discovered it had been a meth lab and a murder scene. The cops wouldn't say much else, but we learned the place was still being used by dangerous people, drug makers, violent criminals, or worse. The initials we'd seen scratched on the wall, they were probably a warning or a sick game to whoever had been inside. I never heard much more about what the police found or if they ever caught the people running the operation. But the thought of us stumbling onto that house while the meth lab was active still haunts me. The idea that the people we scared off might have been inside, or worse, that they could have caught us, it's a nightmare I can't shake. I still see that wedding dress in my mind, stained and hanging there like some horrible trophy. The ropes and chains, the blood-stained tools, the darkness of that dirt room beneath the house. It all feels too real. Since then, I've never gone looking for thrills like that. That night changed me. It made me realize how close we were to something truly evil, and how lucky we were to get out without more than a twisted ankle. It's the kind of thing you don't talk about much because people won't believe you, or they'll think you're exaggerating. But I know what I saw, and I know what could have happened. And that's why when I'm out late at night in those quiet woods, I still keep my shotgun close, and I don't take any chances. Because sometimes real horror isn't about ghosts or monsters. It's about the terrible things people do, hidden away in the darkest, most forgotten places. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you find those places by accident. I was out in the Appalachians for what was supposed to be a calm weekend loop hike. I planned it for a while, nothing too crazy, just a 25-mile circuit over 2.5 days, enough to clear my head and get some time away from people. I started early on a Friday morning. The trailhead was empty except for one other car, probably someone doing a longer section. Weather was decent, partly cloudy, maybe mid-60s. The forecast didn't call for rain, and I was packed light. A single-person tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, water filter, and a small emergency kit. Day 1 went by without any trouble. I followed the loop as planned, made good time through a few gentle climbs and descents. The woods felt typical for the Appalachians, old growth with that mix of soft earth and exposed roots. I camped just off a ridge the first night, found a flat enough patch where I could lay down, made some instant rice, and called it a day. It got chilly fast once the sun dropped, but that was expected. The wind rustled the trees a bit overnight, but I slept all right. The next day, I broke camp around 8 a.m. and kept heading east along the loop. About 3 hours into the hike, I came to what looked like a fork in the trail. One direction continued along the obvious route, blazed and well-worn, but there was another path veering slightly to the right. It wasn't marked. No blazes on the trees, no signs, but it didn't look brand new either. Looked like a footpath, maybe an old logging route. There were even a few boot prints. I thought it might be a shortcut or side trail that reconnected later. I'd seen a few like that before, unofficial paths made by hunters or locals. I figured I'd take it. It was heading in the general direction I wanted to go, and I had GPS, a compass, and a paper map just in case. Worst case, I'd backtrack. So I stepped off the main trail and followed it. At first, the path was clear enough. Narrow, but not overgrown. The leaves on the ground had been walked on recently. Some crushed down, twigs snapped. I didn't feel anything strange yet, just the usual silence of the deep woods. No highway noise, no planes, just wind in the canopy and the occasional bird call. The trail dropped into a shallow hollow, then started climbing again. The further I went, the more the forest changed. It got darker. Not because of the weather, there were still gaps in the clouds, but the trees were denser here, taller, and the underbrush started to choke the path. Still, I pushed forward. I figured I'd already come a half mile down this track, and going back would waste time. Then I stopped seeing any boot prints. The trail turned soft, like it hadn't been used in years. Moss grew right across the footpath. Cobwebs stretched between branches at knee height. It felt like I was pushing into a part of the forest that didn't want visitors. The quiet got heavier. No more birds. No insects. Just wind, barely there. I should have turned around. I know that now. But something about the way the trail wound ahead, like it was always just about to open up, kept me going. That's when I found the shack. It was tucked in a thicket of rhododendrons, nearly invisible until I was almost on top of it. The wood was gray and soft with rot, the roof sagging inward. Windows were broken out, shards of glass scattered on the mossy ground. One of the shutters hung by a single rusted hinge. A tree had grown close to one wall, forcing the boards to bow outward. The door wasn't locked. It wasn't even closed. It leaned open, held in place by debris on the floor. I stepped in, just a few feet. I had my hiking pole in one hand, a flashlight in the other. It wasn't dark inside, but the shadows were deep. The air smelled like mold, wet wood, and something else metallic dry. Dust maybe, or rust. Inside, there's almost nothing. Just a single wooden chair facing the doorway, and a fireplace filled with ash and bone. The bones were long, some curled, some cracked. I didn't get close enough to tell what kind. I didn't touch anything. I didn't sit. I just stood there for maybe 20 seconds, then stepped back out into the trees. My chest was tight, and I was breathing like I'd just run up a hill. I kept walking. Faster now. The trail, if you could even call it that anymore, kept going, winding downhill, and I followed it without thinking. I wasn't sure if it would reconnect with the main trail, but I didn't want to backtrack past that shack. Eventually, the trees thinned a little, and I found a clearing. Not a proper campsite, but flat enough, and I was running out of daylight. I didn't want to keep walking with night coming on. I pitched my tent, boiled water for a quick meal, and forced myself to eat. My nerves were shot. I'd felt uneasy in the woods before, bad weather, close bear encounters, but this was different. The kind of feeling that creeps in from the back of your brain and settles behind your ribs. I didn't build a fire. I just sat in the tent, tried to calm down, listening, but there was nothing to hear. No owls, no leaves rustling, just complete silence, like a vacuum had swallowed up the forest. Even my own movements sounded muffled. That's what finally made me realize I was holding my breath over and over and barely exhaling. I laid down eventually, but I didn't sleep. I just stared at the roof of the tent, waiting for something to happen, waiting for movement outside or a sound. And sure enough, sometime past midnight, I don't know exactly when, I heard the bell. Just one ring. It wasn't close, maybe a couple 100 feet away, but it wasn't a cowbell or a wind chime. It was heavy, solid, the kind of bell you'd hear in an old schoolhouse or hanging from a church tower. It rang once, clear, sharp, then nothing. I sat up, heart pounding, and didn't move again. I didn't turn on my headlamp. I didn't unzip the tent. I just sat there, waiting, straining to hear anything else. But the bell didn't ring again. I stayed like that until first light. At dawn, I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. Didn't eat, didn't filter water, didn't even lace my boots right. I just threw everything into my pack and started walking back the way I came. I didn't want to risk going further down that path. I didn't care where it led anymore. I wanted out. The trail was harder to follow going uphill. The moss and roots were slick, and I kept slipping, falling forward into brambles. I cut my palm on a sharp rock, bled through the gauze of my kit. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but I didn't stop. When I finally reached the fork where I'd left the marked trail, I almost cried. I turned left back toward the main loop and didn't look back. That night, I stayed in a proper campsite. Fire ring, other hikers nearby, the works. I didn't talk to anyone. I just sat near the fire and stared into it, my whole body sore. When I got back home a day later, I opened up my GPS track and loaded it into a mapping app. I wanted to see how far off course I'd gone. The line traced neatly for most of the loop, then veered off sharply to the east into what looked like a blank section of forest. I pulled up topo maps, satellite imagery, even LiDAR overlays from Forest Service database. There was nothing there. No trail, no old roads, not even a clear break in the canopy. The section I walked didn't exist on any of the maps I checked. Not recent ones, not old ones. I zoomed in on the point where I found the shack. There was no clearing, no signs of structure, just solid tree cover. Same with the place I camped. The clearing I remembered was just part of the tree line. As far as any record showed, that stretch of forest was untouched. I've done plenty of backpacking since then, but I've never gone back to that part of the Appalachians. I still don't know what I found out there. I don't try to explain it anymore. I don't tell people what I think it was, because I don't know. It wasn't ghosts or demons or anything supernatural. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear voices, but something was wrong out there. Wrong in a way that doesn't need a name. Sometimes places just feel bad, and when they do, you leave. I was lucky enough to get out. That's all that matters. It was one of those nights on the road that stuck with me for a long time, the kind that digs into your mind and doesn't let go. I was hauling a load of timber from a small mill out in the northern woods to a lumber yard down near the city. It was late fall, just past the first frost, and the air had that sharp cold bite that wakes you up after hours of driving. The highway was mostly empty, which I liked. Less traffic, less stress. But this night, that empty stretch was what made everything feel wrong. I had been on the road for close to 10 hours by then. The cab was dark except for the faint glow of the dashboard and the headlights cutting through the night. The only sound were the steady hum of the engine, the tires rolling over the pavement, and the occasional creak and groan of the trailer behind me. The radio was off. I was tired but focused, eyes glued to the road ahead, watching for deer or anything else that might wander out. Around this time of year, animals get restless before the cold fully sets in. The highway I was on was a two-lane road that wound through dense forest for miles. I had driven it dozens of times before, but tonight something felt different. I can't explain it exactly. Just an odd silence, like the kind you get right before a storm. No birds, no bugs, nothing. The trees on either side looked black and heavy, their bare branches clawing at the sky. About halfway through my route, I noticed a car behind me, tailgating closer than I liked. It was one of those old sedans, dark color, with headlights that seemed too dim for the road. Usually, when someone rides my bumper like that, they want to pass. But this guy didn't pass. He just stayed there, barely keeping his headlights on, like he was trying not to be seen. I slowed down a bit, hoping he'd move around me, but he matched my speed exactly. I kept watching in my mirrors, and every time I glanced back, he was there, steady as a shadow. I didn't recognize the plate, but that's not unusual on a long haul. I try not to let it bother me. Sometimes you get strange drivers on the road, nothing more. The road curved ahead, and I took it slow, leaning into the wheel. The trailer shifted slightly, and I heard the soft clank of the chains holding the logs. The load was tight, but I always checked it twice before starting. I trusted my rig, and I trusted myself. Still, the presence of that car was unsettling. I passed a small rest stop with no one around. The lights were flickering, casting long shadows on the empty lot. I thought about pulling in to take a break, but the guy behind me stayed too close. I figured I'd keep going until I reached a better spot. Around the next bend, the road narrowed, and the trees closed in tighter, like they were pressing against the highway. The cold air made my breath fog up the side window. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my neck was tense. I try not to look back too often. Suddenly, the sedan's taillights blinked off. Just vanished. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but all I saw was darkness behind me. I eased off the gas and braked gently, checking my mirrors again. No sign of the car. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it or it had turned off the road. But the road behind me was straight for miles, with no exits or side streets. My heart picked up. Something about the sudden disappearance didn't sit right. I shook my head and told myself to focus. Maybe it was just a glitch with the lights or a car that pulled into the woods. I tried to push the feeling away. Then, just as I was starting to relax, I noticed something odd on the side of the road. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. At first, it looked like a person, but the darkness made it impossible to tell. It was motionless, staring at the road. I slowed down. The figure didn't move or step back, just stood there, almost too still. My headlights barely reached that far. I flicked the high beams on and off, trying to get a better look, but the figure vanished. I wasn't sure if I'd seen it or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I kept driving, my eyes scanning the edges of the road, waiting for something to jump out. Nothing came. Still, my grip on the wheel tightened. I felt like I was being watched. About 10 miles later, the radio crackled to life out of nowhere. Static at first, then a voice so faint I could barely hear it. No music, no normal broadcast, just this low, broken sound. I tried to turn it off, but the knob was stuck. The voice got louder for a moment, then stopped abruptly. The sudden noise shook me, and I pulled over at the next turnout, my heart racing. I cut the engine and sat in silence, listening to the quiet of the night. The radio was dead again. I took a deep breath and looked at my phone for the time. No signal. Of course, this stretch of highway was notorious for dead zones. I debated calling it a night and finding a motel nearby, but I still had miles to go. The company expected the load delivered by morning. After a few minutes, I restarted the engine and pulled back onto the road, eyes peeled. My mind was wired tight, every shadow and sound amplified. Half an hour passed without incident. I started to calm down, telling myself the night was just playing tricks. The road curved out of the forest, and ahead I could see the first signs of civilization. The dim glow of streetlights, the silhouette of buildings. I relaxed a little, even smiled, thinking I was nearly through the worst part. Then the sedan appeared again, right behind me, headlights off just like before. It was closer this time, and the silence felt heavy. I accelerated a little, but it matched my speed instantly. No attempt to pass, just riding my tail like a ghost. That's when I saw the windshield. The driver wasn't there. At least, no one was sitting in the driver's seat. I looked closely, squinting through the dirty glass. The seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, and the sedan did the same, matching me exactly, perfectly synced. The engine roared behind me, and the tires squealed against the pavement. I shifted into reverse, backing up slowly, heart pounding. The sedan reversed with me, its empty shell a dark shape in the night. I was frozen between disbelief and fear. This wasn't possible, but there it was. Then the sedan's headlights flicked back on, blinding me for a second. I threw the truck into gear and slammed the gas pedal down, racing forward, the tires burning on the asphalt. The sedan didn't follow. It stayed right where it was, motionless, headlights shining like a warning. I didn't stop until I reached the highway exit. Once on the main road, with streetlights and other cars around, the sedan was gone. I pulled into a truck stop and parked next to a few other rigs. I stepped out of the cab, hands trembling, trying to make sense of what just happened. Other drivers were there, chatting and getting coffee. I wanted to tell someone, but didn't want to sound crazy. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching my mirrors, refusing to close my eyes. The next day, I called dispatch and asked if anyone had reported a strange car or anything unusual on that stretch of road. No one had. I thought about what I'd seen, the empty sedan, the figure on the side of the road, the radio voice. Maybe it was a trick of fatigue, maybe stress or the cold, but I still don't know, and I don't want to find out. After that night, I always avoid that highway when I can, sticking to the main routes where there are more trucks, more people, and more light. Sometimes when I'm driving late and alone, I think about that empty car tailing me, matching every move like it was watching, waiting. I never saw it again, but the memory stays clear. That night taught me that the road holds its own secrets, and some of them don't have easy answers. You learn to keep your eyes open, your hands on the wheel, and your mind sharp, because out there, in the quiet dark, not everything is what it seems.